Right. We are back live, I think. We'll call the meeting to order. The next order of business is Jeremiah Ryman with the County Commissioners Association, I believe. Go ahead, Jeremiah.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I'm Jeremiah Ryman here on behalf of Wyoming's County Commissioners. I also have our Deputy Director, Kelly Little, joining me in the room, and we're excited to discuss this topic with you. The association brings this topic forward on behalf of our members, and in particular, those counties that are dealing with the pressing issue of congestion, traffic congestion in their communities. There are really several options for addressing the congestion issue, and I'm going to just talk about the three that highlight this agenda item, and others will be able to articulate a little bit more about what is the most advantageous for their communities. So the first option for addressing congestion issues, and I will note it's perhaps the least desirable amongst them, is this idea of congestion pricing. In its simplest, congestion pricing is a tolling practice that is intended to shift rush hour travel to off-peak periods. And when you think about doing that, primarily as you look across the country, you're shifting individuals that aren't part of the commuter-driven traffic into periods where it's more favorable for those commuters that are trying to get to jobs. If you want to think about this in terms of other similar variable changing or charging systems that are used by other industries, you can think about the airline industry, the phone or utility rates. All of them use some form of a congestion pricing in order to shift consumer activity. I will note that this is an option that would, if it was to move forward, require both state and federal authorization. And in particular, the federal authorization would be expected to take some period of time. I was talking to Director Reiner last week, and he indicated it could be as much as a decade if you wanted to go that way. And I know you all have looked at tolling practices and all the complications that are there. Those would exist for that particular option. Again, it's the least favorable amongst those that have been working on this issue. The second option is to institute rapid transit bus lanes. And if you look at counties across the state, there really are three right now that are partners in some sort of a rapid transit system. I don't know that any of them operate them on their own, but those three counties are Laramie, Fremont, and Teton counties. So rapid transit bus lanes, essentially you are dedicating lanes of traffic and or traffic signal priority to commuter buses. It's intended to provide a more reliable, convenient, and faster and regular bus service to particular areas and communities. That one does as well require some sort of a state authorization, and in particular, it would require some ability to enforce the fact that those lanes would be dedicated to buses, perhaps at specific times or wholly dedicated to that particular practice. The third option is a high occupancy vehicle lane. This could also be associated with an emergency vehicle lane, and I think you'll hear other speakers talk to that particular interest for their communities. Essentially, you're dedicating one or more lanes of traffic to put restrictions on them, to encourage ride sharing, or again, ensure that public safety services have some sort of priority in getting to or from accidents. It's typically open to vehicles carrying at least 2 or if not more passengers. If you look at the Colorado Front Range, Denver for a long time had a HOV lane that was 2 or more passengers. That in the last year or so has increased to 3 passengers, but typically in that 2 to 3 person range. Again, those could be designated for emergency vehicles as well. You can also assess or put access restrictions that are for a 24-hour period or for certain parts of a day that are peak congestion periods. And like the rapid transit idea, it is intended to remove congestion from the normal lanes of travel and improve overall traffic operation. That option does require state authorization, both to implement and to enforce. So like all of these, that's the reason that this committee is considering this issue, is if we were to move forward with them in any particular community, it does require your involvement. Again, the final 2 options could be moved forward individually, or they could be put together in a manner that is most feasible and in addressing those most pressing of issues. So, Mr. Chairman, those are really the options that do exist for dealing with this congestion issue. You will hear from at least one of our member counties about their preferences in trying to advance this particular topic, and we'll be here to support them. And I see Commissioner Probst is here. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to stand for any questions that might be.
Questions, committee? Okay, next in our line of discussion here would be the Wyoming Department of Transportation. Did they want to weigh in, and then we'll have Commissioner Probst? Or reverse that? Director Reiner, there you are.
Mr. Chairman, that's certainly up to you. I can certainly let Commissioner Probst go first if you wish.
Yes, go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope I can be heard. Thank you all. Thank you, honorable members of the committee. I'm Luther Probst. I'm a county commissioner here in beautiful Teton County. Before I start my comments, I'd like to just draw your attention to a letter. It was sent Saturday, September 19th, from the Jackson Hole Mountain Resort and the Teton Village Association, which is the governmental or quasi-governmental authority that oversees Teton Village, a letter supporting what I'm going to speak in support of briefly here, and that is authority for bus lanes. In Teton County, our largest employment center, particularly in the winter, is the Jackson Hole Mountain Resort in the Teton Village. They both have a strong history of managing traffic, allowing for increased development, increased economic activity at the mountain resort without more traffic congestion. The challenge we face here in Teton County is that our largest winter employment center is 7 miles up what is functionally a dead-end road. It's a 2-lane road with some turn lanes. It's connected to the town of Jackson and to the airport by a 2-lane highway. Both Highway 390, the 7-mile dead-end road, is a state highway. So is Highway 22 that connects the town to the mountain resort. We have widespread support from the mountain resort, from Teton Village, from the sheriff, from really the whole cross section of the community to have a dedicated bus lane. Bus lane, also a lane that could be used for emergency service vehicles and for vans and other high occupancy vehicles. We need this for several reasons. The first is, as was mentioned earlier, is when someone gets injured at the mountain resort, particularly on a stormy afternoon, it is almost impossible, short of a helicopter, which often doesn't fly when it's needed in that condition, to bring that emergency service vehicle to the mountain resort and get the patient back out. and unfortunately, people do get injured. We could ask Jeremiah to suggest someone that he may know. Our friend Jeremiah. So we recently secured federal and local funds for a transit center at the intersection of 22 and 390. We call it the Stilson Transit Center. Another transit center improvement over in Driggs, Idaho. We've got federal and local money to improve our transit. And what we need is authority for bus lanes. Bus lanes can reduce wear and tear on our highways. They do reduce wear and tear. They reduce maintenance costs. They will allow us to better address our traffic congestion issues. So we just would respectfully request that the Transportation Committee here support legislation that authorizes the Department of Transportation and the counties to designate bus lanes, or bus/emergency vehicle/high occupancy vehicles, and to grant the Highway Patrol and the Sheriff's Department the authority to enforce the dedication of these lanes for those three categories of vehicles. That is it's pretty straightforward need for us. I think it is badly needed here, and it gives us a chance to see further development of the mountain resort without the gridlock that we are experiencing now. There's plenty of options for how we would go about this, but the idea would be a bus lane that can be reversed. So perhaps in the winter, in the morning when people are going to the ski hill, there's a north running dedicated bus lane. Then in the middle of the day, it reverses to a south running so that those buses and those emergency vehicles can work both ways. That's what our need is. I'm sorry I can't speak to a broader need, but this is a real acute challenge we face here in Teton County, and we hope the committee will join us in moving forward legislation that will give us that authority. Thank you. I'm more than happy to stand for questions.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, would that require 2 more lanes to be built on that 2-lane road, or do you have enough lanes to have a bus lane?
That's a good question, Senator. Thank you. We have not done the technical studies necessary to answer that. It could be 1 lane that reverses flow based upon the dominant flow of that time of day or that time of season. Beyond that, I would defer to General Reiner. But the lane now, the highway now is 2-lane in most places. It has some turn lanes, so it would require some expansion in order to use a bus lane. But we have not yet determined whether that would be a center lane or whether it would be shoulder running. Once we get the authority, we would like then to do the engineering and the traffic studies necessary to give us a sense of what's going to be the best technical strategy from a highway and community perspective.
Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the distinguished commissioner coming before us and chatting. The commissioner had spoken offline and asked him a couple of questions. One question that I did have, though, is enforcement capacity, because it sounds like highway department, local sheriff's deputies do not have the statutory authority to enforce those HOV or bus lanes. My question is, where's the local sheriff on this? Do they have the capacity to do this? Would this add an extra workload to them, or is this something that they're comfortable when they feel that this is an additional workload that they have the capacity for?
Thank you, Representative Weston. That's a good question. The primary responsibility for enforcement on Highway 390 is with the Highway Patrol. That's my understanding. I'd ask General Reiner to confirm that. The Sheriff's Department often winds up providing support. I have not discussed this with the Highway Patrol, but the sheriff is particularly happy about the opportunity to see law enforcement officers, search and rescue, and EMTs use that dedicated lane. My impression is, and we would need to see the final legislation, of course, but the sheriff is supportive of this from an enforcement perspective as well. He's got some enforcement challenges on that road generally, but they're looking for, they're ready to embrace that because it will improve access for emergency services and for his access to the village.
Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Probst, I appreciate the information here, and I can tell you, being up there pretty much every summer for my entire life, and then over the past couple of years during the wintertime, I've seen exactly what you're talking about with the traffic, especially flowing back and forth from the village to town. My question is that's a state highway, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So my question is if we're looking at authorizing, the authority to build a bus lane, what is the county looking for in regards to state funding to help expand that state highway as well? So I imagine this is step one. What is step 2 and 3 if we move forward on this? Do you guys have plans to ask for the normal split share of the county versus the state funding on the state highway? What are you guys looking for there?
We have not, thank you for the question, Representative Brown. We have not crossed that bridge yet. We need this authority in order to have a dedicated conversation about that. I don't have an answer for you today about the funding. We're very fortunate. We just received a federal build grant for transit improvements at Stilson, and some improvements at the intersection of 22 and 390, the road that moves up towards the village, as you know. But as far as the future of that road, we have not, it is not currently in any of the state plans that I'm aware of. We have not crossed that bridge yet. To back up, the build grant is a mix of federal and local funds. We'll have to decide upon the widening of that road at some point in the future, but I would anticipate, I just don't have any firm understanding of that. That's also a question that General Rhino might want to entertain as well.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to hear from the director on that as well. And the reason I'm asking this question, just maybe for both ideas here, is we just spent a good portion of 4 hours on the road usage charge and trying to fund our state highways, and that's what we have right now. And my understanding here is we're looking at adding even more to it. And so everybody has their challenges. Everybody's facing these things going on right now, and we have uncertain revenue streams at this point. So what I don't want to see us get into is the position of, well, we're going to authorize this, but now we can't afford to move anything forward and have this conflict. So if the I keep wanting to say the general, but if the director can give me some of that information, maybe a little bit of an idea, that would be helpful.
Go ahead.
I would just add, Representative, that we are not here asking for any favoritism on the state funds. We understand the situation the state is in. With this authority, we can start the process of deciding what kind of mix of funding is going to be required for both of those roads.
Okay, Director, would you want to weigh in on this now?
Mr. Chairman, absolutely. Maybe let me just sort of logically, or hopefully logically, work my way down through that list. First, my thanks to the commissioner and to the County Commission Association for their interest in transportation. There is certainly no doubt that our area in the state of highest congestion is in the county that Mr. Probst is the commissioner of. And I spent a lot of time thinking through those issues, and we've had multiple discussions with county officials at all levels in your great county. And what I would say initially is we are certainly willing to work with all levels of government to facilitate efficient and effective transportation systems. That's my job now, and we're pretty focused on doing that. Maybe to walk down a couple of those options and discuss them. First on tolling, I agree with Mr. Riemann is it's a long process, and in fact, there's more ways to get to no than to yes. But the easiest way to get to yes on tolling is to construct a new lane. Because remember that while it's a state road, federal funding is involved typically, because we probably don't, well, I know we don't have enough money right now to build it with state money. And so federal rules apply. So we would have to start early in the planning stage, say, hey, this is going to be a toll road, work through the wickets, and that would help facilitate the ability for us to install tolling. A long process, like was described, but certainly one that YDOT would be willing to work with the county to pursue. The concept of rapid transit bus lanes and HOV lanes is also something that we conceptually support and have passed that on. The issue for us, as has been brought up, is there's really no lanes to support that as we speak. The roads are 2 lanes. And while there have been expansion plans in the past, those have not come to fruition. And so today finds us with lots of traffic and 2 lanes. And so the comment that was made about, well, if you want to do those, you got to add a lane is precisely correct. And so right now, then that goes into the funding decisions. And I think Representative Brown, you're correct. We just spent 4 hours, talking through the funding issues of the state and the guiding principles that we really didn't talk about this time, but we've talked about in the past is we're going to put our money to asset preservation first. The issue with adding new lanes obviously is initial cost, and then you have to maintain it. So we're going to focus on maintaining what we have as we speak. So nothing in that is a short-term solution. And my apologies to the county commissioner on that, to Commissioner Probst. I mean, I wish we could do something fast, but there's just not good options at this point. Now, if statute changes would help set the conditions for success, we conceptually support those. Would certainly like to see what they are and how they work. Your comment about our ability to enforce safety and traffic laws in terms of HOV, my understanding is correct, is that would take a statute change. So that's maybe a quick rundown on where we're at in terms of congestion mitigation in Teton County, and would answer any other questions that would be out there.
Okay. Committee, any other questions? Yes, Mr. Probst, Commissioner. Go ahead.
Just want to thank the director for his comments. Agreed with everything he said. We're in a pickle, we know that, but the statute changes would help us set those kind of foundation for success going forward at some point. I would add that on Highway 22, we do need that authority as well. That the expansion of that highway will be in the department's program over the next 5 or 6 years or so, and having this option authorized will help as that conversation moves forward. But we are keenly aware of the financial situation and understand that this is a long, slow process. And we are not here asking somehow to be, to leap to the front of the line or something, but just to lay that foundation slowly and then see what we can do in the future to address the traffic on 22 and on 390. So thank you for your comments, Director.
Representative. Yes, Representative Crank, go ahead.
Director Reiner, could you comment any on, I think it's 390. I worked on that road about 20 years ago, and it's 2-lane, and I believe it has a bike path, and to get the bike path in it, even at that point, the right of way wasn't wide enough to get it in there, and it's a little special circumstance in that the property values along that route are, from Cameron, I'd say they're probably 100 times different than what we face. So that's another issue for a specific roadway that I'd have a little question on if that even looks feasible.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Crank, yeah, you know that area well. So here's my understanding of the agreement that we have is that bike path is actually within the Department of Transportation right away. And we allow that with special permission and some caveats. And my understanding is that one of those caveats is, and understanding is, when we widen the road, which eventually will happen when the right conditions are set, we will take over the bike path, and then the county or whoever built it would be responsible for, if they want another bike path, they'll have to build it. But you know, it was placed there in the right of way, with the knowledge that if we ever needed that for more lanes, that it's our right of way, it's the state of Wyoming's right of way, and that the replacement of the bike path would be on the local officials.
Thank you.
Okay. Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's worth reiterating and acknowledging distinguished commissioners' points about separating the discussion about funding for this and making sure we just have the statutory authority in place. I mean, as the director made it pretty clear, and as we're all well aware that right now, just kind of the pinch that we're in financially, and that's obviously a whole different situation. But I think in terms of just having the statutory authority for them to have that on the books for the county, I certainly don't see a major issue moving forward with something like that. Just giving them the ability to have it there if they like, and the authority for it to be enforced by local law enforcement. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Director, did the Department of Transportation have more to weigh in on this subject?
Mr. Chairman, negative. I think unless there's specific questions, we'll answer them, but that's really where we sit. We're really willing to help be part of the solution and move this ball down the road in terms of trying to address the congestion issues in that great county.
Okay. So we're ready for some public comment, I believe. And distinguished Senator from Teton County, Mike Grew, go ahead. You may.
Mr. Chairman Eklund, thank you. And Mr. Co-Chairman Flattern, thanks you. And members of the committee, thank you. Been listening all day, and it's been a fascinating discussion. And I'm going to be up in just a little bit with a bill, but I did want to weigh in on this one just a little bit, give some context to some of the questions that were asked. This is an important subject for Teton County. The traffic on 22, as a lot of you know, and I know the good director knows, at times is as busy as Interstate 80. The traffic on 390 on a ski day at the Jackson Hole Mountain Resort can be quite daunting. And so, this is something, and this enabling legislation, I think, is something that, and I think Representative Western put it very well, is something to really look at, and then talking about the funding separately. But to talk about that funding, I want to mention it too, something that Representative Brown brought up, and your discussions this morning. With regard to 390, Teton County, and as a former commissioner, I can bear this out. We've been engaged in partnership pricing and congestion pricing on this road for over 15 years. When the Jackson Hole Mountain Resort came forward with their last master plan, the commissioners, as a condition of approval, had them buy the what Commissioner Probst was speaking to, the Stilson lot, the transit center. The Mountain Resort purchased that lot for that purpose. The money that they've received since in operating the bus system to and from Teton Village each year is partially paid for by the Mountain Resort and by the other owners, property owners, business owners out at Teton Village, the Teton Village Association. They're the ones that wrote you the letter in favor of this. So some of these partnerships with our local business community already exist. And actually, I think they could be expanded. And I think that there are ways that we could do that, whether it be with local taxing authority, transit districts. Right now, Teton Village does assess themselves an extra tax. That's what pays for the association. And so there are a lot of tools that could be used to affect. And so it would not necessarily, Representative Brown, to your question, necessarily have to just flow right back to the Department of Transportation. I think the Teton County, and I think the commissioners deserve a lot of credit for actually trying to turn a new page and really work collaboratively with the Department of Transportation, and look forward to them doing so in the future. So I was trying to answer some of the other questions come. If there are any more, I'd be happy to try. Thank you.
Questions? Okay, is there any other public comment?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have anybody further.
Okay, thanks, Mary Beth. So I think we're ready to move on to the next subject, which is highway safety. Am I correct? According to my schedule, that's what we've got. Do we have Carol Broughton on the line, Mary Beth?
No, Carol is not. She works for LCCC now. She doesn't work for this company.
Oh dear. Okay, I've got the wrong. Well, the Department of Transportation. I guess you're up next then. You're muted.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. So on the highway safety, certainly it's a combination of bills. And I would, with your permission, like to turn the floor over to Colonel Haller, who's really, who's the head of our highway patrol and is leading our safety efforts on the road. Certainly that's one of our many focus areas, but it's right up there at the top of what we do. And it's at the very top, in fact. And so with that, let me turn over the floor to Colonel Haller.
Mr. Chairman, am I coming in?
Yep, we can hear you.
All righty, thank you. Would you just like me to start with the information relative to the bills on restraints?
Yes, please.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I do have a little bit of information to update as far as child restraint. I'll just start with that information first. Vehicle fatalities continue to be the leading cause of children deaths in our country. I believe we talked about this at a former meeting. Currently, 14 states have implemented laws for children under the age of 2 fit to face to the rear in their restraints in vehicles. And also, as previously noted, rear-facing child restraints, better protect infants and children due to their small and fragile skeletal structure. This aligns with industry standards while also increasing the safety of our children. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for any questions or move right on to the primary seatbelt.
Committee questions? Not seeing any. Go ahead, Colonel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Specific to primary seat belts, I did want to provide some fatality updates. As of August 31st of this year, Wyoming had 82 fatalities. Of that 82, 62% of the Wyoming residents that were killed were not buckled in. We've talked some about the residents being up to 2/3 more likely to not buckle than non-residents. 19% of those 82 fatalities were non-residents who were not buckled in. So quite a disparity. In 2018, the Wyoming seatbelt analysis identified that 86% of residents were wearing their seatbelt here a couple of years ago. Having said that, last year in 2019, that same analysis identified only 78%, or approximately 8% less than the year prior, meaning that we're trending the wrong way. In 2019, nationally, the seatbelt use was at 91%. This is a 13% difference than the state of Wyoming, and potentially could save lives. It is well known that states that have a primary seatbelt law have increased rates of seatbelt use. And to date, Wyoming is one of 15 states that does not have a primary seatbelt law. And with that, Mr. Chairman, that is a quick update.
Okay, questions, committee? Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. Colonel Haller, and you may know, but this also may be for Dennis Byrne and or Taylor. With us not having a primary seatbelt law, what type of federal funding are we excluding ourselves from like the Federal Department of Transportation or Highway Administration?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Broad, I would have to defer to somebody else on that.
Does anyone else have that answer?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's Director here. So the shorter answer is at the current time, Mr. Chairman and Representative Brown, is our revenue from the federal government is not shortened. However, the revenue that we do get is required to be earmarked and be spent in certain ways. And so we have to take the money that comes in and it goes to seatbelt education, traffic education. And so we're pulling it from the roads because it has to go to other specific focus areas.
Follow up on that. So Director, you're saying that if we did have a primary seatbelt law, we would not have to put those funds to that area and we could use them for the road. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, that is my understanding.
Thank you.
Okay. Well,
Mr. Chairman, would you like us to walk through, there certainly is the child restraint bill. Would now be a time to walk through that?
correct. I think normally Heather would do it. But I believe you guys are prepared to do it, and we'll just do it that way if you would.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman, because you're right. I think Heather, did Josh want to do that, or did you want us to take the lead on that?
Josh, are you okay with YDOT taking the lead on going through that bill?
Yeah, that's fine with me, Mr. Chairman. I certainly looked through it and I could do it, but I'm not as familiar with it as I was with the earlier bill. So happy to defer to the department.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'll defer to Colonel Haller, unless you want me to do that, Colonel Haller.
Director, I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chairman, working, let's see, 21 LSO 0013, working draft 5 on page 2. The committee will note that there is inserted language, line 13 and 14 for child safety restraint system. In addition, on 15 through 18, the inclusion for each child who has not reached his second birthday, the infant or child safety restraint system required by this subsection shall be a rear-facing infant or child safety restraint seat. So in essence, we are looking at just including that those children that are under the age of 2 years would be in a child restraint seat that is facing to the rear. In addition, noted that on the bottom of page 2, staff comment should the committee choose to increase fines, that outlining the penalty statute 31.5.1304 would also need subsequent revisions. On page 3, this does get into the penalty, paragraph A, line 4. Currently, this is a fine of not more than $50. As previously talked about, there had been discussion of increasing penalties. And also on line 11, for a second or subsequent offense, currently the fine is $100 in consideration to increasing that fine as well. As we move on into page 3 on line 27, now we're getting into the primary seatbelt. And this was a discussion surrounding raising, well, let's back up to line 25. The driver who violates this section, meaning not wearing a seatbelt, may be fined, striking $25, inserting $100 for the driver, and a fine of not more than $200 for each passenger under the age of 12 that violates this. Line 31, any passenger who violates this section may be issued a citation and may be subject to a fine of not more than strike $10, insert $100. Any person who violates this section shall be required to complete a safe and defensive driver education course to department rules. And then, Mr. Chairman, on line 38, section 2 would be repealed. And on the subsequent page 4, line 4, that section repealed would be no motor vehicle shall be halted solely for a violation of this section. Mr. Chairman, that is the working draft.
Any oh, yes.
Pappas.
Yeah, yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just had a question for the Colonel. The statute as it stands.
You just clicked off, Senator. You're on mute.
There we go. As the statute as it stands right now, obviously without the changes that we're considering, how often is it used, and are a lot of folks being fined, or is it, obviously we don't have a primary, you can't stop them for that, but I just wondered what your experience has been.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, specific to the child restraints, on average, it's more than 3,000 citations a year where our children are not being restrained. And when I say not restrained, I'm talking not at all. In addition to, there's also times where they're not, the device is not being correctly used, which means it's still not safe. Specific to primary seatbelt, that is very difficult to say because, as you mentioned, we don't have a primary seatbelt law. So whenever we talk about secondary enforcement, oftentimes individuals will, we believe, buckle up once the lights are turned on. They know that they're being stopped. If this is noted, then of course they will be cited. But I believe right now it is very under enforced.
Mr. Chairman, follow up.
Go ahead, Senator.
So for the child restraints, how many of those are repeat offenders?
Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to follow up on that and get that information to you.
I was just interested in seeing whether the amount is so low at this point that people don't care.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, I would say that along with enforcement also comes education, and they can be collective, meaning together, or subsequent. Having said that, we do provide child restraints to individuals. They are provided information. We have a close working relationship with the Department of Health, who has provided a number of rear-facing, or they call them convertible car seats that can face to the rear or to the front as the child ages. So oftentimes it is about education. There is an element, as you might imagine, because the parents aren't buckled up. Therefore, they're not restraining their kids as well. So I wouldn't say that it's a lost cause. You know, the information that I've seen throughout the country that whenever child restraints facing to the rear as well as primary, you do gain increased compliance significantly.
Thank you.
Okay, further questions? All right, we're ready for some public comment. Mary Beth, do we have anybody who wants to comment on this?
We do, Mr. Chairman. We have Sheila Furtish, Katie Ligursky, and Catherine Wilkinson, and they are all admitted into the meeting.
Okay, let's start with Sheila. Sheila Furtish, go ahead. Okay, we're not hearing you. I'm going to go to Catherine right now and see if you can get yourself back online, Sheila.
Good morning or afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Catherine Wilkinson with American Property and Casualty Insurance Association. Thank you for the opportunity to testify virtually with you all today. We would like to stand in support of this bill. We do see it as an important safety bill on both aspects of the child rear facing child restraints, as well as the primary seatbelt bill. It would definitely help Wyoming's law and our safety track record by passing both of these. We do appreciate, with regard to the child safety, that there is still the existing language that children also are not in the front seat, or that their child restraint system is not placed in front of an airbag, because that is very dangerous to children. But we do stand in support of the bill, and I would stand for any questions.
Committee questions? Thank you, Mrs. Wilkinson. Mrs. Furch, are you there yet? I saw you earlier on. Maybe you're just having trouble getting the connection. We'll go to Katie next then. There you go. Hi, Katie.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually was interested in testifying on the automatic vehicle identification system, as well as I'm sure Ms. Furch was as well too, rather than on this current bill.
Okay. I wondered. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. Sheila, did you want to testify on this one?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Sheila Furch. Sorry, I had a little bit of a glitch there. Excuse me, I wasn't prepared to testify on this bill, and my members have not taken a position on this actual bill, but we do stand in support of primary seatbelt laws. We'll be discussing this bill Wednesday, and I think it's likely that they will be supportive.
Okay. So, yes, Senator Pappas, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I would just like to take the opportunity to move the bill.
Okay. Bill has been moved and seconded by Co-Chairman Von Fledern. Okay, thank you, sir. Discussion, I think we're done with public comment. Am I correct, Mary Beth?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Discussion on the bill, amendments, discussion.
Question.
Yes,
First,
Representative McGuire.
Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just invite for the committee to consider with regard to primary laws, and I looked up some states specify whether it is a front seat primary law or if it includes front, rear, and other seats. And I think that that would come into effect when you look at, for example, a Suburban or something like that that has multiple seats. So the question there would be whether or not we policy-wise would want to have law enforcement making stops based on front seat seatbelt use or all seats in the vehicle. But the other thing, and I guess I just find it a little bit problematic, I'm in favor of the policy for both the child seat as well as the seatbelt usage. But I find it a little bit problematic that we are taking a something that's for child safety restraint and overreaching maybe to get into the primary seatbelt by repealing 31.5.1402. In my opinion, that should be two different issues and should be handled separately. But I would invite discussion by the committee on that. Thank you.
Yes. Co-Chairman Von Flater.
I agree with Ms. Representative McGuire that 31.5.1402 should be separated out and should be its own bill because we are making that a primary seatbelt law versus the child restraint. So I see that as two different issues.
Okay. Representative Brown.
I'll make that motion.
Okay. Move to strike section 2 on page 3, line 38. Strike line 38. We have to
Mr. Chairman?
the end of it. Yes, sir. Go.
I understood the motion that it wasn't just to strike it. Obviously, you would strike it out of this bill, but it would also put it in its own bill of its own.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
And I need a second. I don't know if there was a second on that.
I will second that.
All right. So are we gonna do two bills then today?
Mr. Chairman, it's literally the same exact bill, and I don't imagine it would be a huge undertaking for LSO to cut out of this one and paste into a new one with the new working draft. I mean, it's some work, but I don't think it would be that hard for us to pass this on because we know exactly what the language is.
Okay. Is that everybody's understanding then?
Mr. Chairman, you have Senator Anderson.
Senator Anderson, I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Chairman, as I understand the amendment, it is to take out 31.5-1402 and the rest of the bill and make it into another bill. It's not just line 38. It's the fines and everything that go along with that. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That is correct. That is the motion.
All right.
Josh, do you have that?
I do, Mr. Chairman. I do have one question for the bringer of the motion, just to clarify. Just with the last discussion on fees, currently the fees are in a staff comment and not officially part of the bill. So I think that would need another motion to whatever you want to do with the fees. Or I need some clarification there anyway.
Mr. Chairman. Hello, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Co-Chairman, go ahead.
So is this just in the first bill is the only place that would have the fees changed? The second bill is not changing fees. We're just doing 31.5.1402 as a separate bill. It's the top one that's 31.5.1303. Child restraints is the fee change, or it could be.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead, John.
So there are two fees there. There's a penalty, sorry. 31.5.1304, I think will go along with 31.5.1303 in the first bill. The second bill, or the second amendment there is an amendment to 31.5.1402, and so that would likely go with the second bill.
Okay. All right, so then we're going to basically have an amendment to split this out and have two bills. Any other questions or
Call for the question.
questions been called for? Go ahead, Mary Beth, I think you're the one calling roll. This will be on the, go ahead, and you just go and say what we're doing.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think you need a roll call vote to split the bills. This is just an amendment.
Oh, that's right. Yep, okay.
So just
Then-
a show of hands will work.
All right, thank you. All right. Amendment to, all those in favor of the amendment to split this into two bills? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10. It looks pretty unanimous. Sounds like a good plan.
And then Josh, did you
Okay.
get the information that you needed on that then? Are you clear?
Mr. Chairman, I don't think I'm clear on whether or not the fees are included in either or both of the bills. And whether, I think as drafted, they were in a staff comment if the committee wanted to include the fee amendment. So I think we need some motion on that.
Okay, do we have
Well,
a,
so, Mr. Chairman, if I may,
yes, sir.
let's go ahead now that we've split them into two bills. Let's work the first bill, which would be the actual bill that we have working in front of us, which I believe, if I've correctly amended this, would be the child safety. Is that correct?
Yes.
So let's work that, and then we'll decide if we would like to, if somebody wants to make a motion to insert the fees in that bill, and then we'll do the same for the other bill, if that works for you, Josh.
All right, is there an amendment? Let's see, Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, the fees are in my, they're not a staff comment on mine, on the second section of this, on 31.5-1402, line 27 through 35 is in red. It's the new fees. It's not a staff comment. I don't, and on the other one, on the other bill now, there are in red, but there's no dollars in them that'll have to be added.
Yes, yes, that's exactly it. Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, my amendment would be on line 4, page 3, $100, insert 100. And on line 11, on page 3, insert 200. $200 would be the
Second.
offense.
I'm not sure who the second was. Representative Brown. Okay. Are we clear on that amendment? Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand on that amendment. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yep, it passes. Amendment passes. Are there any further changes on the first bill? And I'm not sure how we split it, because we had one working draft and now we've got two working drafts. So I guess Josh would know how to do that. But on our first working draft will be the child restraints. Is there any further? Oh, Representative Newsom, go ahead.
I think what we need to do, thank you, Mr. Chairman, is just delete from line 13 to the rest of the bill, and then reinsert that into the second bill.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, we've already done that.
We've done that already. That's done.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we've done is right there at line 12 is the end of the first bill, correct?
Yeah.
as amended. Director Brown, did you have something to say?
Mr. Chairman, I think at this point, we could go for question on the first bill, which is the child restraint bill. And then judging by Josh's facial expressions, he understands exactly what the motion is and what we're trying to do. And we could probably move forward on the next one, but I think we could call for the question on the child restraint bill, which is basically page 1 and page 2, all the way to line 13 on page 3. And that's what we're voting on.
All right. Senator Pappas.
Mr. Chairman, we will need to also include section 3.
Well, is it?
Josh, just don't screw me up on this one.
I believe you are correct. So we're going to have to throw in, or just, why don't we just amend a section 3 into what we're talking about here?
Mr. Chairman.
We wouldn't put it in there anyway. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, the bills would both have the effective date, and then I'll also make the conforming changes to the title. So you don't have to worry about that.
Okay.
Thank you, Josh.
All right.
Call for the question, Mr. Chairman.
Everybody's ready? Okay. Question's been called for. Go ahead, Mary Beth.
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote on 21 LSO 0013 version 0.5. Senator Anderson,
Aye.
Senator Hutchings,
Excused.
Senator Pappas,
Aye.
Senator Steinmetz,
Excused.
Representative Blake,
Aye.
Representative Brown,
Aye.
Representative Crank,
Aye.
Representative McGuire,
Aye.
Representative Newsom,
Aye.
Representative Obermuller,
Aye.
Representative Western,
Aye.
Representative O'Hearn,
Aye.
Co-Chairman Von Flatern,
Aye.
Co-Chairman Eklund.
Aye.
That passes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So I guess what we probably need to do before we move what's going to be a second bill is see if there's any further discussion by either the Department of Transportation or the public. We had discussion on it before we started working it, and I think it's probably cleaned up. Mary Beth, do you know of anybody who has an urgent need to talk on the second bill?
I do not, Mr. Chairman.
You're good. Director Reiner.
Mr. Chairman, we're good on that. Certainly, we would very much be on record as saying a primary seatbelt law would greatly facilitate safety in this state. You know, as the director, I see every fatality accident that we have in this state, as does the colonel. And some of them absolutely just break your heart. And people would be alive today if they were wearing a seatbelt, and they aren't. And so certainly respect the desire to kick it into 2 parts, would support that. But I do see a primary seatbelt law for this state as key and essential for our safety. Thank you.
Okay, any further discussion by the committee? We have Representative Blake.
Yeah, could I ask a question of Director Reiner or Colonel Howard? Either one of you, how many states have a seatbelt law like we do, if you know offhand? What my question would be.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Blake, to give you an exact number, I would have to go back and look, but I'd be happy to follow up on that.
Maybe, Mr. Chairman, a follow-up, maybe surrounding states, Colorado, Utah, are they, Montana, are they all like we are, or they have primary seatbelt law?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Blake, you know, thinking at all the information that I've read, I believe that the states that you just mentioned are primary seatbelt law states.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And of course, you can believe everything that you see on the internet, but from what I'm looking at, it looks like 35 states have primary laws, 15 states are secondary, similar to Wyoming, and 10 have no laws. So if that helps to answer Representative Blake's, I could dig into that further and find out about the surrounding states. But the question that I would invite the committee to consider is that some states differentiate with regard to the primary seatbelt law with regard to front seat passenger, i.e. the driver and the passenger in the front, and other passengers in the back. And the question, the reason that I think that that is worth at least some consideration, and personally I'm in favor of the primary seatbelt law for all seats, but as the driver, you don't always have control over people that are behind you in the vehicle. And so if we pass a primary seatbelt law that covers the entire vehicle, that means that you could be driving along happily and be stopped and you didn't know because maybe somebody behind you had removed their seatbelt. So I think it's worth consideration, but overall I am in favor of a primary seatbelt law. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Senator Pappas.
Yeah, that would beg one question then. If assuming that the car was full of adults, not minors, if someone is stopped because of that, who gets the ticket? Just the driver or the person who violates the seatbelt law?
Yes, Colonel Haller, you can answer that one.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas and Josh, correct me, but as that is a very good question. As I read the bill, it talks about any person who violates this section. So in the example that was given, if the driver is buckled and then a passenger in the rear seat is not buckled in, it would be the passenger in the back seat that receives the citation, as long as they're an adult, of course. Now, if they're not an adult, then I believe that it would be the responsibility of the driver to make sure that they were buckled in.
Okay. Yeah, Senator Pappas.
Mr. Chairman, so if we do decide to go down the path of having front seat, back seat different, then or even if it's not different, I suppose somehow that ought to be clarified in our statute when there's a minor involved who, I guess it would be the driver at that point.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
I can defer to Colonel Haller.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, on page 3, line 28 and 29, we do get into and a fine of not more than $200 for each passenger under 12. So we are differentiating between juveniles and adults.
And Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
And just to continue on there, then the change on line 33 is it was already a separate fee for a passenger. Previously, the passenger would be cited for $10, assuming an adult and not over or not under age 12, and that's increased to $100. So they were treated separately under that existing statute.
Representative Blake.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I took Representative McGuire's advice and I looked at Colorado, and it is front seat passengers only, and any need seat belts, and any child 15 years old and younger riding in the vehicle be properly secured regardless of seating position. So that's the state south to us. Thank you.
Okay, committee, any further discussion? Yes, Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this one be a question for the good colonel. In a real life situation in day-to-day law enforcement, would you rather have it so that the citation, regardless of who is unbuckled, the citation just goes to the driver and sort of a strict liability, as opposed to, it just seems to me like you could do a can of worms if you're trying to issue people in the back of a vehicle a citation for not wearing their seatbelts. I don't know. I would just ask that question for you. I support whatever you would say. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative McGuire, I would say since the language in this statute has been in place for some time, the enforcement could stay the same. In other words, if you do have a violator in the vehicle who is other than the driver, that they be cited if they are an adult, to me goes back to individual accountability. There could be circumstances where it would be unfair to cite the driver. And you've got an adult passenger in the vehicle who was for what, being uncooperative or whatever reason. I'm not aware of any concerns enforcing that, and I don't see that being an obstacle moving forward either.
Okay, further discussion? All right, are there so there are no changes, committee? I believe we are ready to vote then.
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote on a new bill draft concerning safety belts required to be used. Senator Anderson,
Aye.
Senator Hutchings,
Excuse.
Aye.
Oh, she's there.
Yep, sorry for the delay. I had problems this morning. Thank you.
Senator Pappas,
Aye.
Representative Blake,
Aye.
Representative Brown,
Aye.
Representative Crank,
Aye.
Representative McGuire,
Aye.
Representative Newsom,
Aye.
Representative Obermueller,
Aye.
Representative O'Hearn,
Aye.
Representative Western,
Aye.
Co-Chairman Van Flatern,
Aye.
Co-Chairman Eklund.
Aye. Okay. Bill passes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Representative Blake.
I've been on this committee quite a while. This is the first time this has been a committee bill and is passed unanimously for sure.
Huh. It isn't the first time that the floor changed our intent, though, when we got out there, and it was unanimous a couple times that I can think of, but that's okay. We'll have other people weighing in on the deal for sure. We're now ready for, figure this one out here. Are we ready for autonomous vehicles?
Mr. Chairman, I believe we have Senator Guru here, and he wishes to discuss, I believe, the Highway Safety Incentive Program. Could be wrong.
Okay. I see it. Okay. Senator Guru, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I was here. I discussed that subject a little while ago, and I'm here now on automated vehicle identification systems, an LSO draft bill 21 LSO 0014 working draft 5. It's the next one down after the seatbelt.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I think we have the Highway Safety Incentive Program, which is Representative Blackburn's bill. Is that
Oh.
what we're dealing with?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
and just, take them however you want. In my notebook, it was the automated vehicle ones and then the highway safety incentive. So take them whichever order you like, but.
Let's do automated, I don't know, is Representative Blackburn here right now, Mary Beth?
Mr. Chairman, no, he's not.
Okay, let's go ahead and do the automated vehicle bill. Well, we've got people on deck and waiting. So Senator Guru, I'm going to have you go ahead and speak on it first. Well, let's see now.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
there in the agenda, there is a briefing, it looks like, on autonomous vehicles presentation by YDOT. Would that be necessary before we look at the bill?
Probably would. I'm trying to figure out what I.
Mr. Chairman, just from a YDOT's perspective, these are, the automated and autonomous are very close. My recommendation is that we talk automated vehicle identification system, which is not autonomous vehicles, and we talk the automated vehicle identification system, which is 14.5, and then we can go to the automated vehicle, which is a separate bill, and have a YDOT briefing prior to that.
Okay. All right. So, Director, do I hand this over to you then?
Mr. Chairman, perhaps I can just say a few words and I'll pass it to Senator Guru.
Okay.
Because he certainly is this was his brainchild. But from the YDOT perspective, we certainly support the concept of what Senator Guru will talk about. Quite frankly, what this bill does is authorize automated enforcement in certain segments of our highway. And it's very similar to the enforcement that we have with school buses. And so it affects an area of Senator Guru's part of the world. And for me, it was very important to apply the same principles to our construction zones. You will see that in the bill. And it was also important for me to support our school zones and to authorize, what Senator Guru will talk to you about in our school zones. And so, Mr. Chairman, I would just say that YDOT conceptually fully supports this concept. And I'll let Senator Guru take the lead and then add if there's a requirement after his comments. Thank you, sir.
Senator Guru, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And when Director Reiner said this is my brainchild, I saw way too many of you laughing at that point. So I just want to say I didn't notice that. Because even it made me chuckle just a little bit. This, as I spoke to you before at your last meeting, this come from a lot of my constituents with regard to Teton Pass. Basically, Teton Pass, as a lot of you know, is over 8,800 foot, is an 8,800 foot mountain pass with over 10% grades on a great portion of it, especially on the downhill slide coming into Jackson Hole from Idaho. And basically, it is YDOT's done a wonderful job of signing it and telling truckers about the weight restrictions on that road. Signs are all the way back into Idaho, back at Swan Valley, where you turn to use the road, that there are weight limits, and there are weight limit signs all the way up the pass, and they are ignored. And the reason why, I believe, is frankly one of money. It is a lot longer to go around Teton Pass. And I think that some folks make just an economic calculation about how often it's patrolled. And so they just take a chance and know if they get a ticket one time out of 10, well, there you go. It's just a cost of doing business. The problem with that is that road is incredibly dangerous to overweight vehicles. And I think that is something that they don't take into account. And YDOT has spent millions of dollars with pullouts, with runaway truck lanes, and now these arrestor systems to try to stop runaway vehicles. And still, yet the problem continues. So one of my constituents have come to me and said, hey, would you put in a bill to ban trucks on Teton Pass? And I think, frankly, that's a step too far and a step I wasn't willing to take. And so try to come up with something, and this is it, to put a scale in the roadway itself. And when a truck rolls over it, on a lot of light flashes, it says you're overweight. And there are two, if you put it in the right spot right across the state line, there are two opportunities for you to turn your vehicle around. And if you don't, what I would profess is that we take a picture of the vehicle and then send them a fine. So if they know they're going to get fined every time they go over when they're overweight, that will in and of itself help curb their appetite from taking the shortcut over Teton Pass. And so that was the general principle. And I went to the director, and this bill kind of came forward. And one of the things the director really wanted to see, because he had some issues about problems in construction zones. And frankly, those of us that drive, for all of us legislators, drive around the state quite often and know that, those are dangerous areas. And so I agreed with the general to go ahead and add that in. And there's been a couple of other provisions that have been added in for speeding and school zones that I think have merit, but I kind of leave those two to you to look at. I signed on to the construction zones because basically, especially in the last couple of years with the bridge work that's gone on, is where I've really noticed it. That federal money that came in to do all this bridge work around the state, those bridges are narrower anyway, and it just seems like it's gotten to be problematic. I just think it's a dangerous situation. I think people aren't watching that as closely as they should. Maybe this will be a way to do it. But I leave those things for you all to discuss. And I've listened to your discussions this morning, like I say earlier, and I know you guys will take a very thoughtful look at this. But for my constituents, and I think there are other applications, I've talked to folks around the state that this may have some application for on windy roads and steep mountain passes, that this does have merit. And as we passed, I think it was Senator Ellis's bill a couple of years ago with school buses and passing stop school buses with photographic evidence to do fines. I think this is an idea that kind of came from that, that is worthy of your consideration. The other reasons why I brought this forward, and we talked about other ideas, one, just having a weigh station involves a lot of cost, a lot of manpower, at a time when we don't have a lot of extra money for manpower and extra cost for such things. The other is dedicating more of the highway patrol resources. And we already have county folks up there, but once again, the cost of 24/7 enforcement is problematic and an expense at a time right now when we're looking to go just the other way. So this is using a technological approach to solve a vexing problem that, frankly, in our minds in Teton County, it really is just a matter of time before a serious multi-fatality accident occurs, and trying to get out ahead of it. And I'm glad to stand for your questions.
Question, yes. Co-Chairman Von Flatten.
Thank you. Senator Garud, did you mention putting it on the Idaho side? Does the turnout right by the Idaho-Wyoming line. You're saying we should construct something on Idaho's side?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman. No, right past that board, right past the border is where I would say to put the scale. There is a way station in that right by that area, but it could be put in there so you could turn quickly. There's also another spot up the road where you could turn as well that wouldn't involve any construction, that you could make that turn. And so I think it could be done. You know, the cost of putting the scale in the roadway would be the cost and of course the photographic equipment. But I don't think it would be a great deal of road cost to redo the road itself.
A follow up, please.
Yes, follow up.
So, and this goes to Director Reiner or Senator Guru. Could you, it would take a separate item to put stop signs or lights or anything into this bill. This is only for schools, construction zones, and for Teton Pass.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, I believe it would be, I think the way it reads, I have to find it in the bill, but I think it reads that WYDOT gets to make that call of what roadways it's to be used on. Director Reiner, maybe you could help me out with that. Let's see.
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chairman, the intent here is very specific and isolated use of this provision on certain trouble areas. And so in my mind, there's three, and Senator Guru hit it. So it's construction zones, it's school zones, and it is Teton Pass. And Teton Pass, you know, and I'm waiting. We can get Colonel Haller on there. Right now, we do have a way to identify overweight loads coming across, and we just don't have a great way of and we just don't have the enforcement to be able to get them stopped. I mean, there's a little note that is forwarded. So Kevin, would you, or Colonel Haller, would you please, with the chair is okay, maybe we can hold that, but I would like to come back to that at some point. But Chairman, that's the three areas where we saw it being used.
Mr. Chairman.
Co-Chairman, go ahead.
On page 3, on lines 6 and 7, it does say, or other violations that jeopardize the safety and welfare of the traveling public. So it could be used for stop signs, for red lights or signal lights, I should say. That's what I'm trying to get at, is that it could be used for about anything.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, as I read that, I would agree with that language. So the original intent was really to sort of restrict ourselves, because I almost fear the overreach of this principle. But I think that would be the will of, you know, the committee on a direction there. But for me, after discussions with Senator Guru, is, hey, we've got some problem areas that are really issues, and so that we should address. It might be, Co-Chairman, that there would have to be, I don't think it should be, you know, willy-nilly per se. There really needs to be a vetting process for where you use this, because it certainly is a next step in enforcement of our traffic laws.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead.
So if we were to delete that, or other violations that jeopardize safety, and you wouldn't be able to use it on signal lights or stop signs, right? It just would be weight limit violations and contractors or employees in a school or construction zone. That would be it.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, that would be my understanding. And from a WYDOT perspective, we're at this point, we're okay with that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
I'm not sure who, oh, there you are, Senator Guru, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chairman. I agree with the director. We wrote this a little bit broadly coming out of the chute and basically wanted to give the committee a chance to pare it down where we were looking for, we were looking for these specific areas. And so, I would tend to agree. I don't want anyone to get the feeling that I'm trying to make the slippery slope here. I would just as soon have it pared down, but I wanted to let the committee have a chance to take a look at it in total and then let it work its will.
Okay, any further discussion on that part or other? Okay. So is Commissioner Probst still on the line on deck here somewhere?
He was, Mr. Chairman. I think he's having a little trouble getting back on.
Okay, we've got other public comment, Mary Beth.
Mr. Chairman, I believe Katie Legursky and Sheila Furtish are available.
Katie, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Katie Legursky with the Associated General Contractors of Wyoming. One of our number one problems that we face on a regular basis on the construction work zones is individuals in the traveling public speeding through our work zone. So we would be very supportive of being able to work with the Highway Patrol and WYDOT when the time is appropriate to employ an automated vehicle identification system to assist with the speeding of the traveling public through our work zones. Ironically, I did get a call from one of my member companies early last week that requested that we set up a meeting with the Wyoming Highway Patrol and the construction staff at WYDOT to visit about the number of accidents that we are having in work zones. And for this particular contractor, he's a project superintendent, and in the last 2 projects he's worked on for the department, he has encountered 6 accidents with vehicles rear-ending the vehicle in front of him because of speeding in their work zone. So we would be very supportive of doing anything we possibly can to ensure that the contractors, as well as the WYDOT employees that are working on the construction job site, as well as the traveling public, is kept safe as possible. So we would be very supportive of this in construction work zones for speeding fines.
Okay, any questions? Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question on the possible cost of a system like this. It all sounds good, but does anybody have any idea on a cost?
I guess I'd go to Director Reiner. You might, one of your staff members may have that idea. If not, anyone else? Yes, Colonel Haller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Hutchings. At our last meeting, we did discuss options, and it was identified that there are several contract vendors that more times than not that state and municipalities enter into contracts with for the equipment, as well as the systems that are automated to issue the citations under the parameters as outlined in statute. With that, we're not looking at a cost or certainly much of a cost. In other words, the fees are directly taken out of citations, and they pay for the system, the equipment, the maintenance of that equipment moving forward. So we look at this as a very low cost or even no cost solution.
Follow up, Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Follow up, Colonel Howard. Thank you very much for that information. When you say there's several contract vendors with equipment and system options for you. Just a little concern here when I think about the communication issues we're having around the state and the cost of those items. Do you foresee constant upgrades, needing new types of systems every 5 years? Have you looked into that as well? Thank you.
Mr. Co-Chair, Senator Hutchinson, I should have elaborated a little bit more. Whenever I talk about a fee coming off the top of each fine that is issued by such a system, the selected vendor actually takes off, near as I can tell, approximately $38. And that does cover their costs. So whatever additional equipment, maintenance that they may need on their equipment and or their software, that would come out of that $38 fee that they are collecting off of each fine and penalty issued.
Mr. Chairman.
Director, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, just to add to what Colonel Heller discussed, to the question from Senator Hutchins, is I believe that in part of the handouts that we sent, if you flip to the automated vehicle identification talking points version 2, dated the 21st of August on page 3, Senator, in there is an analysis of the revenue and operational costs. And at the top of that chart is the anticipated revenue from this, which certainly does not go to White Hat, but it goes to our school facilities, is about $7.2 million. If we contracted it out, which is our preference, the cost for us is about 2.7 million. And so really the net for us is about $4.5 million that we see. So is there a cost in contracting this out? Yes. Do we make it up through the fines that are received? The short answer with our analysis is yes. And so this is actually cost beneficial for the state. I'd actually accept cost neutral actually because of the increase in safety. And so as we looked at the analysis, for us, it was a win-win. Not only do we get enhanced safety on the roads, it doesn't end up costing us revenue. It doesn't cost us money in the end.
Thank you, Director Reiner.
Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question that occurs to me, especially since there would be a third party, a vendor that would have sort of a vested interest in recording more violations or recording all of the violations, and having driven across a scale a few times and questioning what they said. So ultimately what I'm getting to is you've got an operator, he's going across the pass or wherever else, gets a notice of violation. What kind of due process would we offer or would be available? He's already unloaded the vehicle, they're going back, and now you've got this citation that you have to pay. How do you fight that? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was my question.
Okay, I guess, yes. Colonel Holler, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative McGuire. Similar to the statute that was passed on passing a school bus, we're talking about evidence that is video. And of course, in your example with weight violations, there would also be the evidence of the actual weight violation. We currently do have a weigh in motion scale on Teton Pass. So using that as an example, it would be collecting all of that information into into that particular violation. And it is considered prima facie evidence, meaning that the citation is therefore legal to be served. Beyond that, whenever we're talking about speeding, there would be a snapshot taken of the violator's license plate as well as the driver. And as the bill indicates that if the driver is not able to be identified, then the violation would actually be, or citation, excuse me, would be issued to the registered owner of the vehicle. Looking at at other states that use this type of referred to as photo enforcement, electronic enforcement, or automated vehicle identification enforcement, those are the standards that have been set. And talking to other colonels and chiefs and sheriffs and whatnot, they have worked very well with vendors.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator Guru.
In answer to Representative McGuire's question, I agree with Colonel Haller too, and what he was just saying. The other redress you'd have is to turn around and to drive down and around the other way and go around Swan Valley. And actually, there is a entrance station that's manned that you could stop at, I guess, and tell them that you were waiting correctly, or make some sort of declaration there if you wanted to. That's usually manned, but it's just not manned coming the other way, and that's the problem that we have.
Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to draw this out, but I think that we've got two different, we need to bifurcate this a little bit. So the first would be the weight issue. And so if I'm driving up Teton Pass and I hit this automated weighing device, am I notified at that point that I'm overweight?
Yes.
Okay. Colonel Haller, the answer is yes then? You're muted. Colonel, you're muted. I can't hear what you're saying.
Oh, that sounded so good. Okay, Mr. Co-Chair, Representative McGuire, the answer is yes. The violator is aware. There are flashing lights and whatnot going off. Be very difficult to say that they were not informed, and there is a location for them to turn around. Even though that location is further down the mountain, we do encourage them to turn around and go back to Idaho whenever they are overweight. Unfortunately, those that do not, and we are in the area, which is not 100% of the time, then we do identify and take enforcement action then.
All right. I think we'll go next to Commissioner Probst.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief, but just to add to the unique situation here in Teton County, and I'll limit my comments to that, 20 to 30% of our workforce commutes over Teton Pass every work day. It's crowded. 8 commuter buses a day typically go over the pass, along with school buses for athletics, plenty of vans. The snowplow operators do a heroic job. Kudos to them. But this pass is inherently dangerous of time before there's a tremendous tragedy. And I stand in support of this legislation from Senator Guru because it will improve safety in a situation that is unique with this pass. So thank you very much. I commend this legislation as it relates to Teton Pass to your favorable consideration.
A question I would have, Commissioner, is so on the Idaho side of things, these trucks are warned before they ever start up the pass as to what their weight should be. Is that
Yes,
correct?
sir. That's my understanding. And as Senator Guru said, there's at least two, maybe 3 opportunities to turn around before they're committed to going over the pass. And relatively speaking, there's a reasonable alternative to go back around through Swan Valley and up the canyon. Sometimes in the winter, that's not an alternative, but some days you just can't get here. And so this will help, and it does give the drivers an opportunity to understand they're overweight and to avoid going over the pass. So it's not a situation where when they get noticed, they're committed. There are opportunities to safely turn around.
Mr. Chairman, if I might.
Yes, Senator, go ahead.
At that turn that the commissioner was speaking of on the Idaho side, before you even turn to start up the pass, there is a large, just like those big flashing signs over Interstate 80 that can be changed. It flashes and says, you know, no vehicles over such 70,000 gross pounds or for whatever the gross weight is. It's a flashing sign right there. And then there are literally, I can't even tell you how many signs that are beyond that, but there's signage all the way up to tell you not to do it. And it just hasn't worked.
So they're in violation before they ever get to the top.
Yes.
Okay. All right, any questions?
Mr. Chairman, you have Sheila Forge.
Yes. Sheila, are you ready?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I am. Sheila Furch, the Wyoming Trucking Association. And I want to take this opportunity to commend Senator Garreau as well. This is an issue, and we certainly want to see some progress in making it better before we see a ban on Teton Pass for commercial vehicles. That would be a huge impact, specifically to a lot of commercial carrier operators in Teton County that operate over that pass well under the maximum weight limits. So we certainly don't want to see a ban. And I understand what has prompted this legislation. And it's, my members have not taken a position on it. We've discussed the concept when you discussed it at your last meeting in May, but they have not yet reviewed this bill. There's just a couple of comments I'd like to make because it is an issue when you have drivers for carriers who are violating what the size and weight limits are anywhere in the state. And that's not something we condone. And if this were to be used just to cite that driver in the commercial vehicle that is over that maximum load limit for being on Teton Pass above that weight limit, I don't have as much heartburn about it as what the language intimates in the bill, where it says size and weight violations, because that's pretty broad. And using a whim for enforcing a violation is a lot different than using a screening device to identify overweight situations. So I have a little bit of concern about the broad language in this bill, as well as the language that Co-Chairman Von Flatern pointed out with using other violations, because that opens it up quite a bit. So it's not that we're opposed to this concept necessarily. I just need some clarification on, you know, are we planning to cite these drivers for violating the maximum weight limit on Teton Pass, or are we splitting hairs about specific size and weight violations over axle loads, over gross weight loads, that type of thing? Because I think that makes it into a much broader issue for the trucking industry. And since this is not, since the language can't limit just to Teton Pass in the bill, and I understand why that's done, but that does broaden it, and size and weight violations somewhere else might be pretty easy to start trying to use it for something it wasn't intended for.
Colonel Howard.
Mr. Co-Chair, you know, thinking back on how we derived at that language, Sheila brings up a good point. And I think the reason we ended up with size and weight is we were taking specific to Teton Pass with the weigh in motion scale, we were taking a look at not only the overweight, and it's actually 60,000 pound threshold. So anything over that 60,000 pound, in addition to trailers. And somehow we ended up with both size and weight. So there certainly could be some language change to include overweight and trailer restrictions. The season for the trailer restriction is typically November 15th through April 30th. This last year, we actually bumped it up to October 15th because we had some arresters run into a sand shed destroyed, as well as our scale house where the WIMS is located on Teton Pass run into. But thinking back, I think that's where we may have come up with that language.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman.
Later.
I need to ask Ms. Furch if there is any other place, Mr. Chairman, if there's any other place that has scales on the roadway. So this is a size or weight limit violation where they're known to be overweight, but is there any other place that does that?
Mr. Chairman, probably Colonel Haller could better that. There may be WIMS in conjunction with some of the ports of entry, which again is a screening tool to see who they want to pull in for weighing on the static scales. And I guess while I'm unmuted, I'll just say to Colonel Haller, perhaps language that would deal with posted size and weight limits or something like that. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but that may limit it more to where we do have size and weight postings like we do on Teton Pass, where it makes it very specific to you are violating this maximum limit, and we are using this automated system to enforce that violation. Just thinking off the top of my head.
Case, Colonel Haller, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Co-Chair, the answer to Senator Von Flatteren's question is yes. We do have weigh-in motion scales at a number of our port of entry, certainly on Interstate 80. And with that, we are picking up, as Sheila would have mentioned or previously mentioned, that we're picking up the total weight as well as axle weights on those vehicles. The WIMS on Teton Pass, we are specifically looking at overall weight because of the heavier the weight above that 60,000 pounds with the grade of road coming down off of Teton Pass, vehicles are simply gaining too much speed. And so, yes, we do have that in other areas, but they are specific to port of entry locations and the other regulatory enforcement.
Okay. Mrs. Wilkinson, you've got some, you'd like to speak. Go ahead, you're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, Catherine Wilkinson, representing American Property Casualty Insurance Association. I will say that we do stand in support of the bill. We did read it as very broad. So we did read this as an overall safety bill, not specific to the one issue. We do like this automated enforcement bill. We think that there are the necessary due process protections in it. We do like that there is the requirement to post signs to let drivers know that those automated systems are there, because that is what makes it work. If the committee would like to have this as an overall broad safety bill, one other inclusion that we would suggest is adding the ability specifically for red light cameras, as Co-Chairman Von Flateren had mentioned earlier, and that would be on page 3. So I would point out that this is a may, not a shall on it. And if you do decide to go with a broad bill, you could add that on page 3, line 6, after violation or red light cameras. Red light cameras would fall under specifically other violations, but if you were to outline it, it would be more clear and it would be a more sweeping, broad safety bill. The evidence that I have and the studies that I have from American and Property Casualty Insurers Association says that posting these automated vehicle systems and letting people know that they are there do go a long ways in making the roads safer. And a lot of that is, extending out the yellow and letting them know that they are there, but that does enhance the safety. So just another consideration, whatever direction you decide to take for the policy. And I would stand for any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions for Mrs. Wilkinson? Okay. Any other public comment?
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe there's anyone else signed up to speak on this topic.
Okay, so I guess a question I'd have maybe for Senator McGrew or Colonel Haller or someone, if we broaden this, we're probably, we first talked about narrowing it down a little bit. Co-Chairman Van Flatern had mentioned that possibility, and then there's a possibility of broadening it. What effect would it have on the bill if we broadened it out a little bit? Because if it's a very specific bill for a specific problem, they're usually easier to pass, I think, that's kind of my feeling.
Senator, Mr. Chairman, if you're asking me, I would say two things. One, wherever I've traveled around the country and even in other countries, when I don't understand the road signs, when I don't read a great many languages, but when I see that camera and I'm driving on a road and I see that little camera and those little white lines all over the road to take that picture of me as I drive through, I slow down. It works. That having been said, I understand in our legislature and some of our legislators that they might look at this and look at it as something that, frankly, I don't quite see, but they may see it as a big brother thing. And I don't want to see that happen. What I want to see happen is a problem on Teton Pass get corrected. I'd also like to see a problem in construction zones, as Mr. Gursky brought up, addressed. I think those two things need addressing. As far as the rest of it goes, I leave that to the committee. I think there is some bait to it. Once again, especially as Senator Hutchings was saying, there are costs involved, yes, but once again, at a time when we're looking at so many pulls on our budget, more police, more people, eyes on the streets to take care of this type of crime, this type of violation is something that is going to become more and more problematic for us. It's something that we're going to say we can't afford at a time when we're cutting back. And this is something where technology can help. I don't want it to take over, but I think it's something worth looking at. And in this situation for Teton Pass, it's absolutely critical.
Co-Chairman Van Flatern, you had something you were wanting to say.
I did, Mr. Chairman, thank you. About 7 or 8, 9 years ago in the Senate Transportation Committee, we had a similar bill or something to do with cameras on speed or on signal lights, I think it was. And I was amazed at the people that spoke against that because it was signal lights, cameras. They didn't want to, this was before we did the school buses, but they still didn't want cameras on signal lights, on stop signs. So I was planning on taking that part out of this bill so it could only be used in construction zones and schools and Teton Pass, basically. But Sheila brings up a good point. Ms. Furch brings up a good point that it could be other things used for other things, but I was going to at least take that out of it.
Okay. Director Reiner.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I really concur with the comments of the two senators. I did want to go back to a comment from the co-chair online on page 3, line, line 7, where you talk about, or other violations that jeopardize the safety. And just say the way I read that, if you go down to line 9, it is very specific. All of those actually apply in a school or construction zone. So I read that as actually fairly limited. And I just wanted to just bring that up as because I know there'll be some discussion, and so that was how I as I went back and reread that.
So I move the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Bill's been moved. Oh, we've got a little more discussion. Senator Hutchins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just quickly, I'm hearing and I'm seeing what everybody's saying. And as I go through the bill, Teton Pass isn't mentioned. And I know what you're trying to do, but does the Senator Guru believe that if we made this specific to the pass, and maybe later on we can deal with these other issues, would that help the bill any? Somewhere in there, amend it to this is for Teton Pass and Teton Pass only, because this is the critical issue that's really driving this bill. Hope that makes sense.
Senator Guru. And then I'll get to you, Tom. You're still muted, Mike.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. And Senator Hutchins, and to your question, I wanted, you always go through these things. I would have loved to have made it Teton Pass specific, but I didn't, talking to staff or didn't think, and talking with YDOT, didn't really think that was possible to, just to call out one roadway, one specific area for this one specific bill. And then the other situations that came up with construction zones and what have you. And so also sometimes wonder, I have noticed at times, can't put my finger on one specific one right now, but sometimes Teton County only bills don't fare so well. That's another one, something else I've noticed. So I was trying to keep it broad enough to where there are other situations that may occur that this may come into play. And then also with the construction zones, especially, I think is a really worthy add. And school zones, of course, something I think we've already talked about a little bit, but that was how I came down. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Crank.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And along those same lines, I think on page 3, line 9, to me, this doesn't specifically say anything about Teton Pass. It says school or construction zones, and I don't know that it is one of those, but could you add employees in a posted automatic vehicle identification zone or school or construction zone?
All right. Yeah, Senator Guru, go ahead.
Well, I look back up to line 6 and lines 5 and 6, where it says automatic vehicle identification system to detect a speed limit violation. But then the next line, size and weight of limit and or other violation that jeopardizes the safety and welfare of the traveling public or highway authorities. That was, to me, that's the Teton Pass part right there. And that's what I was trying to get at. And say any roadway that qualifies under that would work as well. Right now, I think Teton Pass is the only one that may come to our minds at this point.
Okay. All right, I think we're done discussing. What's your will?
Move the bill.
Been moved by Co-Chairman Von Flatern.
Second.
Second by, I'm not sure who. Blake. Representative Blake, okay. Okay, discussion and changes on the bill that we might have.
I do, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead. Go ahead,
On
Senator.
page 3, on line 6, 7, and 8, it says size or weight limit violation on line 6. You would delete or other all of line 7 and line 8 through traveling public or highway authorities. Add the word and contractors or employees in the school. So the new reading of the bill would be the Department of Local Authority may employ an automated vehicle identification system to detect a speed limit violation, size or weight limit violation, and contractors or employees in a school or construction zone.
I'll second that for discussion purposes.
Okay, it's been seconded. Discussion committee. Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I would be in favor of that and simply bring up for the purposes of discussion. Speed cameras and red light cameras are not new to the Wyoming legislature. They've been discussed, rediscussed, super discussed, and then discussed again, and have always failed in the past. And the reason being is there are issues with due process, but it really comes down to a policy question. And last year when we passed the bill concerning passing a bus and taking pictures of it, that was an example that was given, and many people said this will be the beginning of a slippery slope. And I would not favor us going down that slippery slope. Right now, there are approximately 20 some states that have speed cameras and have red light cameras. But on the other side of that argument, there are 8 states who had speeding cameras and had red light cameras, rejected it, and have passed legislature prohibiting the use of cameras. And again, it gets into, we have a very rural state, and the question becomes one of policy and what's going to happen. So me personally, I would be in favor of something that is very specific, that deals with the weight issues. But I would also want to see, in addition to that, I would want to see some kind of due process insofar as, okay, I get it. There are sensors in the highway. You drive across the sensors, a red light lights up. But I still want to know if I'm operating that truck, I still want to know what my weight is, because any mechanical system is subject to error and subject to failure. And you're trying to make a living, and you've got an automated system that tells you that you're in violation. I want some kind of a mechanism where I can go drive across a scale or something and continue on and get my business done. But I simply am skeptical of these scales which are in place to alert. But I find it difficult to say that, to accept that they can weigh the vehicle and the axles when you're traveling by at 65 miles an hour. I find that difficult to comprehend. Maybe it's so, I don't know. Thank you. Those are my comments, Mr. Chairman.
Any further discussion on the amendment? You ready to vote on the amendment? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I'm sorry, raise your hand. 6, 7, 8, 9, that 10. So that amendment passes. Any further discussion or amendments? Yes, Representative Overmuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would bring, Mr. Chairman, I would bring your attention to page 3, line 14, committee also. At the end of that, it says, if the identity of the driver of a vehicle against whom a violation is recorded under this subsection is unknown. I'm trying to understand how a driver would be unknown or why you couldn't find out who the driver was. And then I have a follow-up observation if someone can answer that for me.
Okay, can someone answer what we're getting at with that part that,
Mr. Chairman.
yes, Josh? Is that who? Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, sorry. Yeah, I think that language comes from the school bus, passing a stop school bus bill that passed a couple years ago. And the idea there was that if you couldn't identify the driver from the camera footage, that it would then fall to the registered owner. And then the later section says that that wouldn't count as a moving violation or anything related to that for a prior offense, but that they could still be, the driver could still be fined unless they can prove that either they didn't give consent to the person who was driving or they had sold the vehicle or transferred the vehicle to someone else prior to the violation.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it defaults, if they don't know who the driver is, it defaults to the owner. The way I understand the rest of that paragraph there, the registered owner of the vehicle, line 17, the registered owner of the vehicle recorded by the automated vehicle identification system shall be fined. But then you go to the next page and look at the remedies for the owner. And you get to line 11 on page 4. And one of the remedies is for the owners that he did not provide express or implied consent to the person who was operating the vehicle at the time of the violation. That's a defense against the fine. It seems like it's circular here where nobody gets fined because nobody knew who the driver was and the owner didn't give any permission. Therefore, nobody gets fined. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, so that would be an affirmative defense of the owner of the vehicle, who would then have to say, try to provide evidence that someone else was operating the vehicle and that the owner of the vehicle did not give them consent to operate that vehicle. For example, if the vehicle was stolen, it wouldn't be fined to the owner, even if the driver of the vehicle was not identified.
So is the answer to my question yes? I mean, what burden does the owner have, Mr. Chairman and Josh? What burden does the owner have to declare who the driver was?
So, Mr. Chairman, like I said, that would be an affirmative defense. So they would be assumed to be liable for the fine unless they could somehow prove that either one of those defenses, either that they didn't give consent to who was driving or that they had transferred ownership of the vehicle. So there could be instances where it would be impossible to find the owner of the vehicle, but the burden falls to defaults to the owner of the vehicle unless they can prove one of those defenses.
Mr. Chairman, Josh, can you give an example of what that would mean in terms of proving that you did not do something? And on line 11, how do you prove a negative like that?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. So again, like if you had made a police report that your vehicle was stolen and then it was caught in violation of this of an automated detection device, then you could use that as your defense, that you had reported your vehicle stolen, someone else was driving, and so you shouldn't be liable for the fine.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead, Jerry.
Okay, so I probably was reading this wrong. Apparently, did not provide express or implied consent means to consent to drive the vehicle, not to drive over the path.
I think that's
Or
correct,
wherever they were
Mr. Chairman. I think that's correct. It's to the consent to operate the vehicle is that phrase.
Got it. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Representative Obermuller, I'm kind of trying to sort through it too, but I'm guessing this is the same language we have with the school bus cameras, correct? That was part of how we had to get that passed so that it was palatable for people. If the car was stolen or somebody didn't have permission and then was a flyby a school bus, well, it would then be the same thing in this bill. I'm not sure that we absolutely need it in the bill, but there may be times we would stipulation, I guess.
Mr. Chairman, is just to ask Josh here on line 11, is the language cleaner if you say consent to the person did not provide express or implied consent to the person to operate the vehicle rather than who was operating?
Mr. Chairman, I think that language would work fine if you made that change. Like I said, I do believe this was taken from that same language that is used related to the school bus as passing a stop school bus, but I'd have to confirm that.
Okay. Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I'm a no vote on this bill. It does seem to me like we're getting into government overreach here pretty bad. Big Brother comes to mind, like Senator Guru mentioned. If it was just on his pass and just for one instance, that'd be a different deal, but it isn't. The problem I have, it does not save lives. It's after the fact. The guy has run across the scales and is overweight, run through the lights, and run on down the mountain and killed somebody. That doesn't save lives. What we got to do is stop them from going on down the pass or over the pass. It looks to me like it's kind of a revenue increaser. That contractor is going to be out there making sure that he catches all the trucks that are overweight and gets a fine for them. I am concerned about the due process for the driver or the owner of the truck. There is probably no due process when you just get the fine in the mail that you did that. I saw this experiment when I was living in Arizona, retired there for a few months. They put up those signs or those cameras, and seems like they got shot out every evening. And they finally backed off, and the legislature backed off and pulled the whole system out. So they're not popular with the populace, and they have a way of eliminating them on the highway. So for all those reasons, I'm a no vote.
Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was a perfect segue. I would offer an amendment. It would probably go toward the end of this bill, and that would be that any vendor who provides these services would be paid a flat rate in a separate line item in the budget, and would not receive or be paid a percent of, as a business person, I would say a percent of the gross for that very reason. If I own XYZ scale company and I'm getting $38 per violation, well, I'm going to be highly motivated to catch as many people and be right up there at the very edge of whatever the weight limit may be. So I think that it needs to be something that's administered and can be monitored by the agency. But anytime you get into something where there's a built-in conflict of interest, I find that problematic. And in my mind, if they're being paid a percent of the violations, that would be a built-in conflict of interest. So I would offer that amendment to be placed in the bill wherever LSO finds it appropriate. Thank you.
Colonel Haller, you're wanting to weigh in on that.
On that, Mr. Chairman,
Huh?
did you get a second?
Second.
Second, okay, somebody gave a second, I'm not sure who. Did you get it? Ah, Representative Obermuller did. Okay. So we are, okay. Colonel Haller, did you have something you needed to say?
Yes, Mr. Co-Chair, just by way of clarification, whatever vendor would be selected if this bill were to be passed, it would be WYDOT that sets the parameters as to what would be enforced. As an example, back to Teton Pass, there's a 60,000 pound weight limit. So those scales are certified every year. But there's also some, let's say, discretion that is used. So if that weight is at 60,000 and we are actually looking for violators that are at 61 or even 62,000, then that's what the parameter would be for those citations that would be issued from such a system. Same thing with, say, speed violations in a construction zone. They would be issued for an amount of speed as dictated. That could be via rules. But this is not discretionary as to a vendor just goes with whatever amount that they see would be a violation. We set those thresholds for each violation.
Representative Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since we're offering opinions on the bill, I'm in favor of this bill. As Senator Anderson said, it wouldn't prevent a death. The death's already occurred. It could prevent loss of lives by making that person driving that potato truck coming from Idaho think twice that they're going to get fined. Right now, they're doing it because they know they're probably not going to get caught, and the fine's probably not steep enough to make it, they're going to do it, make it worth their while. So I'm in favor of this, and we narrowed it down enough for to vote for this. It was a little broad, and so it could prevent loss of life, injuries, fatalities. So let's be proactive instead of reactive. Let's do this. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a amendment. So I guess what I didn't understand, Colonel Haller, was, were you saying that you already have the parameters in place that Representative McGuire's getting at, a flat rate is already there or not?
Mr. Chairman, no. Specific to the rate, I'm not aware of a vendor that would provide just a flat rate. My comment was that a vendor does not set the threshold on what they will cite and what they will issue a citation for, so that fee would be collected. Certainly, I understand the concern, the fees collected from each citation issued, but in reality, it would be WYDOT that sets the threshold, meaning at what weight, back to Teton Pass example, would a citation be issued? It would not be the vendor. It would not be the vendor who says if you're going this fast, you'll be given a citation. That would be WYDOT.
Okay. All right, are we clear on this before we vote? So the amendment would, Josh, would you read the amendment so that we know? Or do you have one conceptually figured out?
Well, so Mr. Chairman, I don't know exactly where it would go in the bill, but I have the amendment as any vendor who provides these services would be paid a flat rate and not a percentage based on the number of violations or something similar to that.
Okay. All right, we're ready to vote? All those in favor, raise your hand. 7. 7 ayes. All those opposed, raise your hand. 2. Okay, the motion passes. I got 2. I think. It's sure easier in a committee room to do this with, I miss everybody, believe me, doing this routine in front of a computer. Okay, let's continue on. Any other changes? So we're ready to vote?
Vote.
Yeah, call for the question.
Call for the question.
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote on 21 LSO 14 version 5 as amended. Senator Anderson,
We haven't heard.
Excuse me, no. Excuse me.
Senator Hutchings,
You're blocked, Senator Hutchings.
Hearing anything?
I thought I pressed it. Doggone it. No.
Senator Pappas,
Aye.
Representative Blake,
Aye.
Representative Brown,
Aye.
Representative Craig,
No.
Representative McGuire,
No.
Representative Newsom,
No.
Representative Obermuller,
Aye.
Representative O'Hearn,
Aye.
Representative Western, Representative Western,
Excused unless he comes back on somewhere here.
Co-Chairman Voslater,
Aye.
Co-Chairman Eklund.
Aye. So what was the outcome? Was that bill pass?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, you have 7 yeses and 5 nos and 2 excused.
All right. So we're going to take a 5-minute break. And so we'll be back here at 3:35.
Thank you.
Okay, is everybody back and ready to get started? I think. So we're having a little trouble getting a hold of Representative Blackburn. I think we're going to move this to the back of the list and see what happens or to later. And we'll go to autonomous vehicles. Am I correct on that? That's our next one after that?
Mr. Chairman, you are.
Okay. So we need I think Jesse Kirchmeyer, are you nearby here? There you are. I'm going to give the floor to you. You can tell us what the working group report has.
Good afternoon, Mr. Co-Chairman, members. Allow me a few minutes to bring up the slide set. I hope everyone can see this just fine. Again, my name is Jesse Kirchmeyer, and I am in charge of the department's autonomous vehicle working group and the overall program development. I just like to take a few.
Interrupt for a second, Chairman. I just have a blank screen in front of me. Is that what he has not put the screen up yet, or?
No, I think we got the same thing going on there.
There it is, right there.
All right.
Now it's good.
You can see it now?
Yes.
Can you see it now?
I think so.
Okay, the presentation is up. And can everyone see the presentation?
I think so. Most of them are muted. If not, they'll speak up. So go
Okay,
ahead.
thank you.
And you might just say what page number you're on. We've got a book as well.
Yes, sir. I'm on page 2 of the slide presentation, and I'm covering the agenda. I just want to quickly inform the committee on what the working group is and what it's doing, and kind of give you a briefing on our way ahead as far as timeline, and then answer any questions or get any further guidance from the committee. So we developed a problem statement that the director approved, and really the reason why we put the working group together was to make sure that we would safely manage the integration of autonomous vehicles into our transportation network. And at the end, what we really see is that we will have all the procedures and policies in place to incorporate AVs into traffic flows and to manage the program as much as necessary for the full integration of AVs. So given those guidance, we did decide to kind of develop a holistic policy, meaning that we saw this as lasting a number of years and taking time, especially since not all the technology is fully developed and not all the federal guidance. In fact, very little federal guidance is actually out there. At the end, our goal is to create the conditions or behavior necessary to effectively integrate AVs onto our transportation system. Current members or folks that were involved at one time in the working group are listed here, and I will tell you this has not stayed static. We've actually added a couple more members in the last month, and I expect that as our efforts continue, we will get more and more stakeholders and interested parties involved. So the main working group meets every other month, and really it only began in February. We've only held about a half a dozen meetings. For the most part, what we've done in the main working group meetings is just try to educate and inform ourselves amongst each other, introduce new stakeholders, and bring subject matter expertise in for discussion. We then split up into 3 sub-working groups, and they meet on the alternate months. One sub-working group is really focused on addressing the legal and vehicle issues so that we have the appropriate operational framework in place. The other sub-working group is addressing infrastructure and vehicle technology issues. so that we can adapt our infrastructure to be able to safely manage the integration of AVs onto our roadway systems. And then the final sub-working group focuses on safety and training. And this is the portion that is involved in operation of the vehicles, first responder, and law enforcement. We've broken our work into 3 phases, and actually they overlap. We are currently in phase 1, education and research, but I would tell you that we are starting to put some portions of working group operations, sub-working group operations into phase 2. In phase 1, we're really focused on education and research. Wyoming was behind some of the other state efforts to integrate autonomous vehicles, especially those states where they have large testing bases, because autonomous vehicle companies either built centers there or that's where they actually were headquartered, and they started focusing their efforts locally. Right now, I would say that this phase will last for probably another year or longer until it's fully completed, and in some respects may never be fully completed. Phase 2 is recommendation and budget. This is where we decide or try to research what policies or procedures the department might have to implement. And again, the basis for this will be the bill we'll talk about later, which establishes the legal policy. We're also reviewing our infrastructure and technology requirements. A challenge here I'll get into later is there are currently no standardized vehicle technology or infrastructure standards established. And then finally, implementation and transfer. So as we address the organizational and operational background and framework to establish the policies, and then we start changing our infrastructure or technology to adapt to the vehicle technology, we probably see that eventually we will have to have some part in the department that manages these vehicles and their operation. Again, talking about what each of the sub-working groups does, the legal and vehicle sub-working group, you can see the responsibilities that they're covering here and the challenges. And the big challenge that we've seen here is definitions, which we've definitely run into as we worked on the bill. There are words matter, and they mean different things to different people, especially to some of our stakeholders, and certain words mean different things. The other problem that we've also identified is there is a lack of framework from the federal side. So a lot of the stuff that's going on in the states is state specific. The infrastructure and technology sub-working group responsibilities are on the left. And really that is centered around making sure everything from our road signs or our striping or anything else like that is usable by the technology. And again, a challenge here is there is no standardization for those type things. So we really have to figure out what direction the technology is going. We have to wait on federal guidance on what technological standards they would like to adapt to, and then where we might be short in our state. It is also pretty clear at this point that standardization of road signs might be necessary, meaning that how we currently utilize road signs in the state may have to change, especially within jurisdictions in the state.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I have a question, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Anderson, go ahead.
On that page 10 that you were just showing, I noticed there's airfield and aviation operations and automation. Are we talking about autonomous vehicles on the highways or autonomous vehicles on the railways and the airfields and everywhere?
Mr. Co-Chairman, Senator Anderson, the answer is yes. We were directed to look at the program holistically. So not only did that include looking at roadway and road system vehicles, but also aviation vehicles, and not specifically UASs, which tend to be flown, for lack of a better word, by an operator at a control system, but autonomous aerial vehicles who are pre-programmed and given a flight path. So we were told to look at both. I'll continue on to slide 11. Safety and training sub-working group. Again, this is looking at the safety and training necessary to safely integrate the vehicles, whether it be testing or deployment, and what kind of impacts that might have on first responders, law enforcement, and or any other operators of the systems. And then making sure that we understand the challenges and communicating those challenges with the public to get the public informed and up to speed so that they trust the technology as it's deployed. Here is the notional program timeline, and you'll see how we're breaking it out. And we really have 4 overarching objectives that we have to achieve. The first is the operational framework, and that is the legal, procedural, and policy statutory things that we need to work out to make sure that everything is established for the vehicles to come on to our systems, whether it's the roadway system or, as brought up previous by Senator Anderson, the airway system, where as much we have control over. The second overarching objective is to make sure that our first responders and our law enforcement understand any unique challenges that may be provided by this technology and how to address it. The third is achieving public understanding and trust. There's a lot of online reports about how the public views autonomous vehicles, and it is all over the place. Younger, technically savvy folks tend to believe that the technology will be useful and that it will be safer than human drivers. Other folks do not trust it and are wary of it being on the roadways with them. And then the final objective, of course, is to update our infrastructure as necessary once those standardization upgrades are set. And that currently is what I have for you today, pending any questions or comments.
Committee questions. Senator Anderson.
So I see that you're doing highways and automobiles and that kind of stuff on highways and aircraft. Are you doing railroads also?
Mr. Co-Chairman, Senator Anderson, we have not looked at railroads because the department doesn't really operate in that area. But if directed to, of course, we would look at it and seek out stakeholders and or subject matter experts to look at railroad systems.
Other questions? Okay. So we need, not sure who's going to be next here. Are we going to start in with the select committee on blockchain? Am I correct, Mary Beth?
Mr. Chairman, following along, I believe that would be the case.
All right. Do we have Senator Rothfuss or Representative Wilson?
Mr. Chairman, both are present.
Okay. Oh, there you, okay. Representative Olson, go ahead. There you go, sir. Welcome to our meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Jared, he's turned it over to you.
Oh, well, I'm still experimenting with this technology. Speaking of technology, making sure it's working
How
here.
about we let Senator Rothfuss go first? You want to do that?
Sure, happy to, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
All right, go.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, committee, we began looking at autonomous vehicle legislation, and we were unaware originally that Transportation Committee was going to be looking at it during the interim. It was, it's kind of on the topics list, but we didn't know that it was going to be something we were going to be looking at legislation on, and it was something that we were interested in our capacity at looking at digital innovation and artificial intelligence, some of the other topics that are under a purview. So we sort of operated in parallel in the beginning, and appreciate the working group's hard work that was just presented upon by Jesse and the other work moving forward. We were briefed on the progress from the working group, and we had Chairman Von Flatern join us at a meeting, our last select committee meeting, as we discussed this. And we had a couple of pieces of legislation drafted, or at least one piece of legislation that looked at the Arizona approach and the California approach, basically, to how to engage with autonomous vehicles. And the interest of the task force, or excuse me, the select committee, is really trying to move forward a little bit more quickly, I think, than what the working group that's looking at it with Department of Transportation is looking at, because we're trying and find a way, if possible, for Wyoming to take a leadership position in this space instead of effectively following behind. So we invited some of the key stakeholders and industry groups to come to our select committee, talk to them for a little bit, and try to find out what best practices are already out there and what other states had done from them, and learn that really Wyoming is quite a ways behind, I think, in this space. We don't have really anything on the books, and we're still in the study phase, where most other states have either passed legislation already to some degree or have an executive order in place that facilitates some understanding of this. So we worked our piece of legislation a little bit, and then we decided, based on testimony, that we would like to see legislation drafted for consideration that would work with what is effectively considered to be industry best practices, using industry stakeholder groups model legislation. We asked that be drafted for our next meeting, which we're having in just a couple of days. And then it's my understanding that the Transportation Committee requested similar legislation, but with a couple of features that were identified through the Transportation Committee. So that's actually the draft. It sounds like it's ours plus your good ideas, and we'll be looking at that same piece of legislation in a couple of days. But we do recognize that there's really no interest in being redundant. We talked to our members of our task force, or excuse me, the select committee, and we just really want to make sure that we're moving something forward this year, and that we're not slow pacing it, because there's so much going on in this space right now. And Wyoming offers, I believe, a great deal of opportunity to be a place where some of these technologies can be tested and developed. And we can work with some of the industry stakeholders on doing that if we have a good framework, statutory framework in place. And to the extent that we don't have one in place at all yet, we really wanted to see that something was done this year, and the legislation that is before you seems like a great way to begin. So I'll stop there and see if my co-chairman has anything now that he's got his technology up and running.
Go ahead, Representative Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I was tuning in earlier to your conversation on this committee, and you had a primary seatbelt law, and here we are with the solution with autonomous vehicles. You don't have to worry about the driver seatbelt law anymore, Mr. Chairman. So, but on a more serious note, just to elaborate on a few of my co-chairman's comments, our committee is definitely interested in moving this project forward, and moving it forward in tandem with whatever this committee has the appetite for, whatever the working group has the appetite for. A little more specifically on the, Wyoming as a leader topic, I think there's a prime opportunity. The working group noted to our committee and to your committee a couple of things that I think create that atmosphere. One is we hear a lot about the lack of federal guidance, and that's a blessing here because it means that we have opportunity. We also hear about the lack of regulatory framework in terms of, go-bys or model acts to look at. And I think all of those speak opportunity to the state of Wyoming as well. We're not, at least from our committee's perspective, we're not entirely interested in finding what works in another state and copy and pasting it into Wyoming. Rather, what we're really interested in doing, at least our committee's perspective, is pursuing something that Wyoming can really break ground on and push the ball forward. So right now you have 29 states that have some type of autonomous vehicle law. And Senator Rothfuss mentioned some of those are by executive order. Most are by legislative action. So when you look at the state of Wyoming with nothing in place, it really sets us far behind. And as this committee is probably at least somewhat familiar with, autonomous vehicles, at least on the highway, might be somewhat of a foreign concept for Wyoming, but autonomous operating machines, at least in the state of Wyoming, is something that we should all be very familiar with. When we're in the agricultural industry, is very common. So, Wyoming farmers and ranchers in the ag industries have been using autonomous vehicles for a very long time. And I think there's some opportunity there to catch up. I'm not sure if everyone here received the report from the Department of Transportation regarding the federal government and Yellowstone. I think there's some opportunity there as well. And so what the vehicle looks like, at least, no pun intended, meaning the bill, I'm not really sure. What we looked at, as Senator Rothfuss noted, we looked at two primary states. Nevada was actually the first state, and we didn't take a look at Nevada's laws specifically, but we looked into Arizona and California. If I recall right, Arizona is a primary state on governor action. So legislative wise, it doesn't pinpoint to a lot. California is a legislative state, so we used a lot at least in our bill draft looking at California. At the end of the day, where the biggest hurdle is probably not in legislation. That's the policy decision that we all in the legislature will make. That's probably the easier lift. The harder lift comes on the back end, and that's when we ask the Department of Transportation to wrap around what we've created in terms of a policy and say, here's the framework for permitting or licensing operators inside the state of Wyoming. That's where the heavy lift is going to come. And when I hear from the working group that there's not a boilerplate copy and paste that we can use, and I think that's right, and that's probably the biggest lift for them. And I understand that's going to be quite a hurdle to make it work for Wyoming, but should be at least some comfort on this in this committee and in the legislature's eyes that the policy decision, I think, is the easier part to make. And that's really what we're trying to figure out right now is just, are we willing to move this ball forward a little quicker? And at least from our committee's perspective, we are. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Committee, questions? So I guess the question I would have is, how far away do you think the country is, or the state of Wyoming, to this being a reality, that we'll have automated vehicles running around delivering things, maybe delivering people? Yeah, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, it's already happening on limited scale in places where they actually are pioneering it. So these are fair weather locations like Arizona and California, to some degree testing, but certainly delivery, typically low speeds. The autonomous vehicles themselves, we know that those are on the road at various levels. It's the fully driverless, where there's no possibility for a steering wheel, the kind of final degree of this that is not, to my knowledge, really out there anywhere except for low-speed delivery. So it's already happening. It's happening around us. We know, in fact, that there are vehicles that are effectively on autopilot driving down the road right now. But getting to the point where we have sufficient testing, I think one of the areas where Wyoming's very interesting would be long-haul trucking, and in particular, looking at circumstances where you have unfavorable weather conditions. There's no better test study location, in my opinion, than I-80 running across Wyoming. If you need a blizzard in July, you can have a blizzard in July. We've got that for you. So it really is, I think, an ideal place to be engaging with industry as this rolls out, recognizing that it's imminent. It's already out there. It's just a matter of scaling, and there'll be more and more capacity for this. So if we wait a long time, if we really take our time, I don't think there's any opportunity for us in this space. We'll basically just be following, and that's where the select committee wanted to engage at a little bit quicker pace and try to identify areas where we could be a partner in development, recognizing that we need to identify as many of those potential topics for economic diversification as we can at this point in time. And this is one where there's a tremendous future. We know this is a many billion-dollar industry within a 10-year time frame.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, I would just add to that. If you bifurcate this and think about it in two worlds, one, the world of the private consumer, you and me, and then the commercial industry. In the private consumer world, I think most experts would say you're easily a decade away from seeing those vehicles sold at high scale or high rates to private consumers. So one thing to think about there is you're only a decade away, and when Wyoming is sorely behind on this. But on the other side is the commercial side, and I would say what Senator Rothfuss is referencing by and large is the commercial side. That's not a decade away. What we're seeing is in the transportation industry, and particularly I think with COVID-19, you're going to see an explosion in self-autonomous vehicles on a smaller vehicle type scale. So in the state of California, for example, in order to effectuate contactless deliveries, these are basically drones or robots, but they're the size of the smart car, if you will, or a Dodge Colt or something of that size, out delivering groceries in the state of California. And so that's becoming bigger and bigger, especially with COVID-19. And that's just a small scale commercial side. The large scale commercial side that I think Wyoming has such an opportunity for is the tractor trailer traveling across I-80. And I think, as Senator Rothfuss pointed out, that's one of the things that I particularly am most interested in as well. Is there is no climate like Wyoming, with the wind and the ice and the snow and the volume that occurs on I-80 for the proper testing to occur. It's amazing to me that so many of the commercial industries haven't sought Wyoming more aggressively for their testing because of our climate. But I believe our committee at least believes that if we open the door, and provide for it, that there will be a pretty significant interest in that, at least in the testing aspect in the state of Wyoming in commercial.
Yes, Mr. Kirchmeyer.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I completely agree with both what Senator Rothfuss and Representative Wilson said. Feedback we get from a working group, because it is so broad-based, is that they really prefer the legal framework to exist in order to get started. So that really is the first step. And it really sped our efforts up in the work group when we saw the opportunity to work on that legal framework and produce a bill. And I will tell you that the bill that we recommended follows the Safe Driving Coalition's framework within some adjustments. And it took lessons from some of the other states who already had established legal framework in place for your consideration. So that is step one. Without that step being in place, it's going to be tough to continue to move on.
Okay, Representative Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Besides Wyoming being a testing facility for long haul trucking, what are the job benefits? People to fuel them up or change flat tires? Or I guess I'm not seeing the big picture of where the jobs would come from versus the jobs that would be lost.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Representative Blake, those are great questions. The regrettable reality is that these jobs are going to be lost to a large degree, and it doesn't matter where it's developed. And that there are a lot of industry studies looking at exactly that point. And I don't have an answer to what to do about that job loss. On the other hand, if we are engaged in some way, then if there are jobs, and you can imagine manufacturing jobs, for example, you can imagine the parts to build these, you can imagine the equipment, the monitoring, the amount of information technology that goes into deploying and working with these fleets. There's a tremendous amount of new development and information technology development that surrounds it. So we can either be in that game or we could not be in that game, as I see it. And I'd rather be in the game. I can't guarantee that we'll end up with a manufacturing facility here, but if we don't even have statutes in place that allow it to happen, I can guarantee we won't. So that's about the best I've got. I wish I had better. I really don't, though.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so
Mr. Chairman, sorry if I may just speak a little bit more to Representative Blake's concern, because as this is probably the number one question I think that comes up when we talk about autonomous vehicles, particularly in the commercial industry, because of the fear of the job loss. And I invite you to go out and look at some of these studies. There are some transportation studies out there that are trying to put, a better pinpoint on what that really means. And I think that Senator Rothfuss speaks well on what's likely to occur. And most of those studies show the same, which is that you're going to see a big shift in jobs that exist, whether that's data analysis, cybersecurity, the monitoring itself, the manufacturing. The other thing to keep in mind is that the process to move into these autonomous vehicles, whether that's commercial or private, whether we're talking about taxis or ride shares or whatever it is, try to step back for a moment and think, at least in my mind, this is how I think of it. You don't flip a switch and then tomorrow all these vehicles are driving by themselves. It's not going to happen. There's probably going to be a really big intermediate step. If we talk about tractor trailers, they're most likely going to still have a driver component to them as you transition into a fully autonomous. And then once you get into a fully autonomous, you have heavy monitoring. And so I think the good reality of all of that is a shift. There is a shift in jobs. The question is whether you have a loss in jobs or a gain in jobs. And most likely, at least I believe when I look at these studies, you have a gain in job. They're just a very different type of job. And I don't know what the right answer to that is. I think basic economics would tell you that a job created in a society, whether it's a job, any job just simply created isn't necessarily a good job. That you need good paying jobs in order for your society to continue to move forward and to flourish and to have the economic base and the tax base to support your society. Now, at the same time, every level of job is still important. So I don't know what the magic is there, but I think that if you had this regulatory framework that allowed for the commercial vehicles, the hope would be that they don't just test them in Wyoming. The hope would be that they also begin to build some of the components here. I think about wind turbines, and whether you agree with those or disagree with those, I think many of us might say that Wyoming missed prime opportunity to manufacture a lot of that material that went up in Wyoming over the last 8 years. And so kind of the same concept here with self-driving, whether it's a rig, a tractor trailer, or a taxi or whatever, if we could play a part in manufacturing components to that, I think we would see a net benefit in jobs in the state of Wyoming.
Yes, Chairman Von Flatern.
Thank you. I'd ask Senator Rothfuss and Representative Olson, who would be the driver? Who would they write the tickets to should the autonomous vehicle screw up? Because now it's in the bill on page 9, talks about the automated driving system is considered the driver. And number 2, it says the automated driving system is considered to be licensed to operate the vehicle. So who would be the final person you would write the ticket to?
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It would be, the intent of that is that the entity that is the owner or programmer, the responsible entity is going to have the liability. It's not going to be an individual in the vehicle unless somehow they change the outcome, right? So it goes to the responsibility of the controlling entity, so to speak. And again, there might be an agreement between if this is a corporation that the vehicle is owned by, then that corporation might be responsible for it at that point, or that might remain with the underlying software. That is also, again, something that I think will be clear during a testing phase, but it is something that we probably need Department of Transportation through rule and regulation to make very, very clear. But this is the type of thing that has been, to a large degree, clarified through other states and through the operating agreements in other states, at least for the testing phase. More issues might come up, though, certainly, depending on if you begin to influence the vehicle in some way, then obviously you're going to be changing that liability.
Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, 30 years ago, we put heavy equipment into the mines, autonomous trucks, 300-ton trucks. They didn't grasp on them. Other countries did, however, and don't use drivers on their large haul trucks. But about that time, the Union Pacific made a presentation to the Mining Association in Jackson that they were taking 800 trucks a month off of I-80 because they were hauling the sea containers on their flatbeds. That didn't solve our CDL problem. We still had a huge CDL problem. We could not find drivers. If you look today, that's the number one problem trucking organizations have, and is finding a CDL driver. And this would free up some drivers for some of those local drives. The long haul drivers don't necessarily want to do that. The next generation does not want to get out on the interstate and drive coast to coast. He wants a local driving job that he can do. So I'm not as worried about the job losses on this autonomous vehicle as could be if we had an overabundance of CDLs. But because we don't have those CDLs, this could be the savior for that trucking industry. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation. So do we have other, I think probably ought to have other members of the public that might want to talk. Do we have any on deck, Mary Beth?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we do have members from the AV working group. I believe Lacey Bruckner, Michelle Edwards, Josh Walther, and then we do have some public comment. Wasn't sure what your preference is as far as, you know, review of the bill draft.
Working group then first. Other members. I'll just start in Josh Walter. There you are. Welcome to the committee meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I'm Josh Walther, Wyoming Highway Patrol. I lead the Safety and Training Subcommittee and was really just asked to join just in case there are any questions of any of our committees. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have, especially regarding safety and training.
So I guess I'd have a question. We have in some other states, we have to some extent autonomous driving going on. Have they experienced any problems that we're aware of? I think I've heard of some in personal vehicles that folks were probably put it on autopilot and crashed into something, but I don't think I've heard of that in the commercial industry or anything.
Yeah, Mr. Co-Chairman, is to the best of my knowledge, there aren't level 4 and 5 fully autonomous vehicles that are operating driverless right now. They all have testers or operators or engineers in the vehicles with them. But I believe what you're referring to is, for instance, with the Tesla models, some folks engaging autopilot, which still requires drivers interact and be available when they're not. That's the issue they're having, is folks are getting on their cell phones and doing other things when they should still be engaged with their vehicle. And yes, I've heard of some crashes being caused because of that lack of interaction.
Okay. All right. Mrs. Bruckner. Hello.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Lacey Bruckner. I'm with the Wyoming Department of Transportation Compliance and Investigations section, and I am a member of the Autonomous Vehicle Working Group. I participate on the Legal and Vehicle Subcommittee for this group, and I was also asked to just be available to answer any questions that might arise pertaining to vehicle title and registration for autonomous vehicles. So I would entertain any questions relating to that.
Committee, questions on titles and registrations? Doesn't look like it. It's like we could get them registered pretty easily then.
Chairman Eklund, I think Senator Rothfuss had a question.
Senator Rothfuss, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, no, I'll let them proceed. I'm sorry to interrupt that. Please go ahead.
Mr. Pickard, hello.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Dave Pickard. I represent today the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. You might recall in previous testimony over the years as I represented the Alliance for Automobile Manufacturers. In early 2020, we merged with the global automakers. So the association includes suppliers, manufacturers, tech companies, and that are all developing a wide range of AV technologies. I just wanted to say I applaud the efforts of YDOT. They asked me to join the working group last month, and our subject matter experts in our alliance have engaged in the discussion and look forward to working with this committee and Senator Rothfuss and Representative Olson's committee as well as we go forward. I would like to just echo and salute the efforts of Jesse Kirkmeyer with YDOT and the others at YDOT. We're headed in the right direction. Let's see how fast we are headed between the two committees, but certainly appreciate it. And I'll be tuning in on the blockchain technology select committee later this week as well. And with that, I'd stand for any questions.
Oops. I don't see any questions. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
All right. Catherine Wilkinson, welcome to the committee again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Again, Catherine Wilkinson, representing American Property Casualty Insurance Association, also a member of the legal working group. And thank you for the opportunity to comment. I do have a couple of drafting comments just based on the bill. In general, on the insurance side with the liability and registration, it looks pretty good from our standpoint. We do have a few additional comments. Just want to point out that this bill does go a step beyond testing and also allows deployment. Typically, other states have started with testing, but just wanted the committee to be aware of that as well. That's on page 7, if you're interested. Also on the insurance side, on page 10, 3121-104, the insurance requirements are set at 1 million, but the federal regulations are also mentioned with a note to be discussed. So if it would be possible, it would be great if that 1 million, the insurance policy could be kept for manufacturing. But if they're going to be different classes of vehicles, the commercial or in other parts, they're defined as perhaps a TNC or perhaps as a taxi, that those other requirements should reflect the federal regulation guidelines as to the appropriate insurance amount for those. If it's $1 million for all of them, especially on the private side, it would be too high and would discourage the technology from actually being implemented. Let's see. We do like a lot of the requirements that are in place with the liability, and specifically, they do like that the liability is outlined on page 11, subsection B, with the operator and the manufacturer or both of them that could be liable due to being involved in the crash. Again, that needs to be separated out. And so it's well written with the liability for that determination there. Would probably need to be fleshed out some more with rules and regulations, but we are happy to see that in there. Following up again with the insurance level requirement, I'm also on page 11. There just should be some more specific definition over whether or not it says an AV network is going to be regulated by, a transportation network company or a hire for transportation network. It just needs to be a little bit more specific that it is an AV network, that it's a little confusing with the language there. The last comment that I had passed along to me is with the registration entitling to reflect that a vehicle is an autonomous vehicle, and also that it would reflect that if vehicles have been updated and retrofitted. So we do appreciate that section. So Mr. Chairman, with that, I would stand for any questions.
Committee questions? Yes, Senator Van Vleuten.
Thank you. And Ms. Wilkinson, did you say that you upgrade a vehicle to the point of autonomy at some point? Do you want, it says fully autonomous vehicle shall be properly titled. So it will be titled, right? Is that how you understand this section?
Mr. Chairman, yes, that is correct.
Okay, I thought you were objecting. Okay.
A question I would have, these suggestions that you have, do we need to make changes in the legislation, or is it covered okay and can be taken care of with some rules and regulations? I'm kind of unclear on that.
Mr. Chairman, I would suggest that there would need to be a statutory change. I don't have specific language just due to the shortness of the bill being released, but I was hoping to have some suggestions for the select committee on blockchain. But I do think that that does need to be statutory, at least the framework, and then fill it in with rules and regulations.
Okay. Yes, co-chairman.
Mr. Chairman, this will be assigned to a, well, if it passes, this bill should then be assigned to a Senate or House committee. And at that time, I think Ms. Wilkinson could bring those forward.
Okay. All right, because I'm not just sure what she's what she's asking of us. It's getting late in the day, and our I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm having a little more trouble focusing. But thank you for looking through that, and we'll, if the bill passes, we'll make those changes that you believe are necessary to make it a better bill. Any further questions? All right. Is that everybody, Mary Beth, who wanted to comment on the bill?
Mr. Chairman, I believe Sheila Furtish is in the meeting, and I think she had some comments she wanted to provide.
All right, I don't see you there, Sheila, but go ahead and come on.
Mr. Chairman, message on my screen that says I can't start my video because the host has, there we go. Now we're ready.
How rude.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sheila Furch with the Wyoming Trucking Association. I am certainly not an expert on autonomous vehicles, but I do have access to the American Trucking Association's subcommittee on autonomous vehicles, which is made up of manufacturers and vendors and motor carriers. So they are a fairly new subcommittee with ATA, but they meet regularly and are taking a look at what other states are doing, as well as trying to guide possible guidelines at the federal level. So I was able to send them a copy of this draft bill, and they did a quick review. They've not had the opportunity to have everyone on the subcommittee take a look at it, and feel pretty comfortable with the majority of the bill. The questions they did have basically comes back to the definition of operator and some questions about operator versus driver. A lot of the same questions that Co-Chairman Von Flatern had about who's really the operator and how does that tie in. So we're working on some language. We would be in the same boat as Mrs. Wilkinson, and probably once they have some language for us to consider being able to offer that as an amendment later if this bill goes forward. Certainly can stand for any questions on that, as well as address a little bit about questions that have been raised about drivers and what the future of drivers looks like. And I think both the co-chairman from the blockchain committee touched on that and did a very good job of that. We often say in the trucking industry that it may be that not all trucks will be driverless, they will be driver assist. That no matter what, there will be someone in the cab of that vehicle at all times, maybe not driving the vehicle, but assisting the vehicle. And that's because you still need to fuel the vehicle. If it's traveling cross country, you need to, someone needs to take it off the interstate and put fuel in it. There are applications where there might be some short-term long haul where they go from hub to hub without anyone in the vehicle, but there would be someone in both hubs that would be checking the vehicle to make sure that the cameras and anything necessary to operate the vehicle autonomously are clean and properly set. So there would be a hub inspector. And so there are different things that will be happening in the commercial end of it. I think that the coast-to-coast application will be much different than what we're seeing right now with some of the local delivery autonomous vehicles that are out there. And it's just something that's growing and changing constantly and is happening quicker than I think anyone thought. And it will just be a shift in what the actual positions will be within the trucking industry.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Hi, I'm having, this is Kevin Haller at the Highway Patrol. I'm having the same standby. Here we go. So if I may, I just wanted to weigh in a little bit on Co-Chair Von Flatteren's comments on page 9. And when I look through the bill, and in addition, Representative Olson had mentioned that this is kind of a step, one of many steps, that there will be intermediate levels before we get to fully autonomous. But when I look at page 9 and it talks about the automated vehicle driving system, and that basically the comments between the driver, the operator, and who is responsible, and again to Mrs. Fort's comments, it seems, when I look at the bill, maybe I'm interpreting it wrong, that we are primarily looking in the draft as fully autonomous vehicles. And it's my understanding that we're not quite there, that there does need to be somebody in the seat, particularly when we talk about Wyoming roadways, Interstate 80, wintertime, things of that nature, that there has to be somebody in the driver's seat and engaged, ready to assume control of the vehicle if there is something that goes wrong, there's fault with the automated system, whatever the case may be. So I would just offer that as a comment, if my interpretation is accurate.
Mr. Kirchmeier.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I have captured all the working group stakeholders' comments into a single report form. I believe that we can work out most of the discrepancies and or clarifications in the work group if given a little more time to analyze the bill and get their feedback. You highlight one of the issues presented based upon the guidance we were given. And the guidance was a holistic bill that covered testing, all levels of automation, and deployment. And what we're getting into is what exactly do certain terms mean, and they mean different things to different people. And I've gotten all those comments, and I believe I forwarded you a copy along with Co-Chairman Von Flatern last Friday. Once I got them from the working group committee, I'm happy to share them with Senator Rothfuss and Representative Olson for the discussion on Thursday. But I think if you give me some time with the work group, we'll probably work most of these issues out in our next meeting and come to a general agreement. And I'm not saying we're going to be 100% in agreement, because there are some friction points between different stakeholders, but at least we'll be able to identify them for you. And so you know where the friction points exist. But of the dozen or so we have, 9 or 10 of them are just about clarity and defining things properly. And from there, I think the rest of it will fall into place pretty well.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. This question is for Sheila. She was talking about the driver assistants that might be in the cab, or engineers or technical people. Is the thinking that might not be a CDL driver, that it could be a technical kind of guy?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, that's one of the questions we have with some of the language that's in the bill. Because right now, it's talking about requiring that they be licensed for the type of vehicle they're operating. If they're in the truck driving, that's one thing. But if they're just the one pushing the button to go, is it necessary that they have that kind of a license? So I think that's a question that we'll need to get some more clarity on.
Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Mr. Kirchmeier has a good idea that we could move this till November, or our next meeting, excuse me, and let the working group work through all these issues with the blockchain group and come back to us. And so we could put our blessings or not on this bill next, whenever our meeting is, October-ish. So that's my thought at this moment.
And yeah, Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On that line, and I would concur that I think that it would be good to have some additional consideration, and I would invite the people who are working on this, the group, to look at page 15, and specifically I'm looking at line number 4 on page 15, where it says the department is the sole and exclusive state agency that may implement the provisions of this chapter. And then if you drop down to line 13, paragraph B, it says no state agency, political subdivision, county, municipality, or local entity may prohibit the operation of fully autonomous vehicles, automated driving systems, or on-demand autonomous vehicle networks. And I would bring to everyone's conscious the story of the 737 MAX and Boeing Aircraft Company. You know, they started working on the 737 MAX 9 years ago, and they developed the MCAS system for various reasons, and it was a close relationship between the FAA and Boeing, and the airplane was certified, and it went out to the public in a absolutely dangerous configuration. As the simulator pilots started training the line pilots to fly that airplane, they could reproduce the problem, and they could put the line pilot in the situation where the MCAS would be confused and start the aircraft into a dive. And there are written reports where the simulator pilots, they reported to the FAA that there's an obvious problem with the software, and it was buried. So what I'm getting to is, I think that here in Wyoming, I think that we should allow for a ground up approach. And I think that paragraph 13 should be changed so that any state agency, political subdivision, county, municipality, or local entity may exercise emergency power to prohibit the operation of fully autonomous vehicles in those situations. And I would encourage you to think about, you've got a sheriff's deputy in KC or someplace like that. They have a problem. And those of us, or those of you who are familiar with the Department of Defense, you know, when there's a threat against the United States, they slew the accuracy of the GPS system. And maybe there's a situation where there are trucks out on the road, the Department of Defense, via an emergency situation, changes the accuracy of the GPS, and you've got trucks that don't know where they are. And you've got a sheriff's deputy that sees that as a problem. That person at the local level needs to be able to raise the balloon and say, stop. We're not going to have these trucks operating until this problem is solved. So I would encourage the working group to implement a ground up type of emergency authority where our law enforcement have the ability to protect the public in situations that are unforeseen, and the 737 MAX is a perfect example. The FAA and Boeing both denied, and right up until the day of the second crash, that there was a problem. And now, under the light of scrutiny, everybody is seeing that there was a huge problem that lots of people knew about, and it wasn't taken care of because of the top-down approach. Thank you.
Senator Van Flatteren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In answer to Mr. McGuire's conversation, or his comments about the department having the sole and exclusive state agency that may implement the provisions of this chapter, I would assume if the rain is not good enough, all the trucks will pull over at some point. And so that probably, the rain being the autonomous or the GPS system. If it's been turned down by the Department of Defense, it will be, all the trucks will pull over. But I don't know why we want more than the department to be the sole exclusive state agency. I cannot see having every sheriff that says, oh, I think there's a problem with this, and he grounds the whole fleet. I don't think that's correct either.
Okay. So I think our discussion probably is over. So as a committee in agreement that we should do a little more work on this and then go over it again in November. Meeting tail end of November. Yes, Senator.
I would agree that the working group should take this and with the blockchain group committee, rework this, go through each one because their comments on the end were quite extensive. The comments that Kirchmeier sent to us. So I think they're quite extensive and they can deal with the department as a sole an exclusive state agency. They can deal with that too. And so I would table this until whenever our next meeting is.
Second.
Been moved and second to table. Any further discussion? All those in favor, raise your hand. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, there's plenty.
Mr. Chairman, I think Representative Olson wanted to make a comment.
Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Olson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And not to change the will or the pleasure of this committee, but the blockchain committee, we have our final meeting early November. We're a statutory committee now, so we can sponsor legislation with the exception of Title 13 banking bills. Those have to go through minerals. So if I understood you right, Mr. Chairman, your committee will table this until late November with the hope that between now and then the working group and our committee can work together on a piece of legislation. I will say that my only hesitation with that outcome is that there is no guarantee that a bill would be produced from this committee in late November, and my committee will already be concluded and will not meet again. I don't know how to approach that, Mr. Chairman. I had some conversations with your co-chairman about that and how, who's going to, I think ultimately in my mind, there's actually still a question of which committee is going to run this bill. There's, whether my co-chairman and I want the bill or not, our committee would still have to decide, obviously, just like your committee. At the end of the day, I guess what I'm getting at, Mr. Chairman, is late November may be too late in the game because my committee won't have an opportunity to react. And what I mean by that is if good work is done and put into the bill, but for whatever reason, the members of this committee don't have the appetite to run the bill, I would like to have the opportunity to present that to my committee to run the bill. And so without, again, changing your will and your decisions here, the only way I can figure out to make that work is that I have to simultaneously continue to run this through my process in my committee. But again, my final committee meeting is before yours. So maybe if we could flesh that out a little more, Mr. Chairman, on who's really going to, without straw polling your committee, essentially is what I'm asking to do, Mr. Chairman, that we have some type of commitment on whether transportation is going to run the bill, if the bill works out the way the working group wants to present it, or we're going to have, I guess we can vote our bill and pull it back, but maybe that's the only option, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Co-Chairman, go ahead.
So Representative Olson brings up a good point, and I would say that the working group needs to put it in bullet points. We do this the first meeting we have. But also, if you guys do take it on and we also take it on, then you guys can drop it. Or if you take it on, we don't, then you'll have something to go with. So that's my only thought at this moment, is that you need to vote as a group, as a committee, to sponsor this bill. And we need to vote as a committee to sponsor it too. And if we don't, and you guys then have something, or vice versa.
That sound okay, Representative Olson? Oh, Mr. Kirchmeyer.
Mr. Chairman, if it's acceptable, I believe that I can get what Co-Chairman Von Flatern asked for complete after our 15 October meeting, which means then we can submit the end product or the analysis to both committees at the same time, and you can take it from there. But I think our next meeting's on the 15th of October. I have the majority of the feedback already. We have to internally work out some differences in opinions of what certain words mean, and some clarifications which were highlighted in earlier points brought out. But I feel confident that shortly after that 15 October meeting, we can be pretty much there, if that's, and then from there you can take it to where you want it.
Well, we still have the blockchain group working on it early in 15th of October. Okay, yes, I'm sorry, that'll work then.
Yes, sir. And I can also give the blockchain folks, I'm scheduled to testify in front of them on Thursday and just get started, right? I could give them an idea of where the stakeholders are and where there's differences. And so they have a really good idea of what we got to work out and the clarity that we want to bring, and the intent versus what showed up in the first draft and how we can fix those sorts of things. So we can be ready to go very quickly after 15th of October.
Okay, does that sound satisfactory to everyone? All right. So moving on, Mary Beth, we haven't heard anything from Representative Blackburn, have we?
Mr. Chairman, I have not.
Okay. I don't know as any of us are prepared to do anything on that. There's a possibility we could do it tomorrow. Now the farm trucks working group is something that's going to be moved to the last meeting as well, unless somebody's been notified otherwise. That was the last conversation I had with Mr. Moline. We have a few things we can't do anything about that are more dependent on the Nebraska Department of Transportation. And then there's some discrepancy on whether we need to have commercial, whether you can license 3-axle trucks commercial or as farm trucks or commercially. And I think that can be resolved pretty quickly, but we'll move that meeting to, or that discussion to the last meeting. Am I clear on that? As far as you know, Mary Beth, do we have anything else besides directions to the staff?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not aware of anything else.
Okay, committee. All right. So we will we'll move the autonomous vehicle bill to the next meeting then. And the farm trucks working group will probably have a presentation then, try to straighten up some things that we're unclear on at that point in time. So Josh, is there anything we need to do before we adjourn?
You're locking up a little bit, Chairman.
Oh, I'm sorry. I am?
Mr. Chairman. You catch about every 4.
I could hear you fine, Mr. Chairman, but
I can
Okay.
hear you fine as well.
anyway, nothing that I'm aware of today that you need to do, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So tomorrow morning, we meet at 8 again. So we'll see you all tomorrow morning.